Dear friend, you are here. That is enough for now. Somewhere in the hours behind you, the day folded itself up and slipped away, the way a letter slides into an envelope. And now you are lying here in the quiet, and perhaps the quiet is not as empty as you wish it were. Perhaps there is something in your mind tonight that will not settle. A question, a worry, a shape you cannot quite see, lurking at the edges of tomorrow, and you find yourself reaching toward it, trying to pull it closer so you can know, truly know, what it is, what it will bring, whether you should brace for it or open your arms. You are not alone in this. So many of us lie in the same darkness, in our own rooms, in our own cities, and we all share the same quiet ache, the need to know what comes next, the need to hold the future in our hands, to weigh it, to prepare ourselves, so that nothing catches us unprepared. We grip the edge of tomorrow as though we might fall from it, and we grip it so tightly that our fingers ache, and still we cannot feel its shape, because it has not yet arrived. It is still forming, it is still becoming, and all our gripping does is tie the hands we need for tonight. There is an old way of seeing, an ancient way, carried quietly through centuries by monks and farmers and grandmothers who knew no philosophy by name, but understood something about the nature of storms and harvests, and the strange way that fortune folds into misfortune, and misfortune folds back again. They understood that the mind that tries to read tomorrow's chapter tonight will never rest, because the chapter is still being written, and the ink is still wet, and the hand that holds the pen does not move according to our wishes. And so tonight, perhaps you do not need to solve tomorrow. Perhaps you do not need to know whether the news that is coming will be good or bad, whether the change you fear will ruin you or release you. Perhaps there is a kind of rest that lives in the space between knowing and not knowing, the way the moon's reflection lives on the surface of still water, not because the moon descends into the pond, but because the water simply stops trying to be anything other than water, and in that stillness, the light appears on its own. Let me tell you about a farmer, not a famous farmer, not a wise man in the way the world counts wisdom, just a man who lived in a small village at the foot of a valley a long time ago, in a country where the hills turned gold every autumn and the fields smelled of cut grain and damp earth. He was the kind of man you might walk past without noticing, unhurried, unremarkable, a little weathered from years of sun and wind. But there was something about the way he stood in his doorway each evening, looking out at the valley, that made the children of the village feel safe, and made the worried men and women pause for a moment and wonder what he knew that they did not. His name does not matter for our story. What matters is that he had a horse, and what happened with that horse is where we begin. Once, in a village that sat between two low mountains, in a valley where the autumn light turned everything the color of warm bread, there lived a farmer who owned one horse. It was not a young horse, nor was it a particularly beautiful one. Its coat was the dull gray of a stone that has been sitting in a riverbed for a long time, and its mane was coarse, and it moved with the slow patience of an animal that had carried many burdens and expected to carry many more. But it was the farmer's only horse, and with it he plowed his fields and carried his harvest to the village market, and in the evenings it stood in its small stable behind his house, chewing straw, and the sound of its chewing was part of the sound of his life, as familiar as the wind through the eaves or the creaking of the wooden gate. One morning, the farmer went out to the stable and found it empty. The gate had come loose in the night, and the horse was gone. By noon, the whole village knew. The farmer's neighbors came to his door, one by one, and then in small clusters, the way people do when they have heard of someone else's misfortune and wish to stand near it for a while. They shook their heads, they clicked their tongues. An old woman who lived 3 houses down brought a basket of persimmons and said, in the voice people use when they are certain of the shape of things, "What terrible luck! Your only horse. How will you plow? How will you carry the grain? This is a very bad thing." The farmer took the basket of persimmons and set it on his table. He thanked her, and then he said, in a voice as calm and even as the surface of a pond on a windless day, "Perhaps so, perhaps not. It is hard to say." The old woman did not know what to do with this answer, so she patted his arm and left. A young man from the next farm came by that afternoon. He leaned against the farmer's fence and said, with the confidence of someone who has recently learned how to have opinions, "You must be devastated. A farmer without a horse is like a river without water. This is surely the worst thing that could have happened to you." And the farmer, who was sitting on his step repairing a piece of rope, looked up and said, "Perhaps so, perhaps not. The story has not finished itself yet." The young man frowned. He did not understand how someone could lose the most valuable thing he owned and not yet know whether it was a disaster. He walked away shaking his head, and the farmer went back to his rope. 3 days passed. The fields sat unplowed. The farmer worked them by hand, slowly, the way a person walks when they are not in a hurry to arrive anywhere. And on the evening of the 3rd day, a sound came from the road, the sound of hooves, more than one set, moving at a careless trot. The farmer looked up from his evening meal, and there, coming through the gate, was his old grey horse, and behind it, stepping nervously, nostrils wide, eyes bright with the wildness of open country, was the second horse, a horse he had never seen before, younger, stronger, with a dark coat that caught the last of the sunlight like polished wood. His horse had not been lost. It had wandered into the hills and found a companion, and now it had come home, and it had brought the wild one with it. By morning, the village knew again. The same neighbors appeared at his door, but this time they were smiling, and their voices were high with the particular excitement of people who were happy for someone else's good fortune, especially when it cost them nothing. "What wonderful luck," they said. "You lost 1 horse and gained 2. You are twice as rich as you were before. This is a very good thing." And the farmer set out tea for them, because he was a courteous man, and he said, in the same even voice, "Perhaps so, perhaps not. It is hard to say." The neighbors looked at each other. Some of them laughed because they thought he was being modest. Some of them frowned because they thought he was being strange. And one of them, a merchant who prided himself on understanding the way the world worked, said, "Old friend, do you not see? Fortune has come to your door. 2 horses where there was 1. How can you not call this good?" And the farmer said, "I am glad the horse is home. I am glad there is a second horse in the stable. But whether this is good fortune or not, The story has not told me yet. I will wait and see." In the days that followed, the farmer's son, a young man with strong hands and an eager heart, and the particular restlessness of someone who believes that the world should move at his pace, decided to train the wild horse. He had watched it standing in the paddock, its muscles taut beneath its dark coat, its head turning at every sound, and he thought, "If I can ride this horse, I will be the finest horseman in the valley." He climbed onto the horse's back on a bright morning when the dew was still on the grass. The horse stood still for one long breath, as though considering the weight on its back, and then it moved. Not the way a trained horse moves, with purpose and direction, but the way a storm moves, sudden, chaotic, answering to nothing but its own wildness. It bucked once, twice, and on the third time, the young man's grip broke, and he fell sideways, and his leg struck the fence post, and there was a sound like a branch snapping in winter. And when the dust settled, the young man was lying on the ground, his face white with pain, his right leg bent at an angle that no leg should bend. The village gathered again. The young man was carried inside, and an old healer was brought, and the leg was set with splints and wrapped in cloth, and the healer said it would mend, but slowly, and the young man would not walk without a limp for many months, perhaps longer. And once again, the neighbors came to the farmer's door. Their faces were grave. Their voices were low. "What terrible misfortune," they said. "The wild horse has broken your son's leg. If only the horse had never come. This is a very bad thing." And the farmer, standing in his doorway with his hands folded, said, "Perhaps so, perhaps not. The story is still unfolding." They did not understand him. They thought grief had made him strange. They went home and talked about him in their kitchens, and some of them said he was wise, and some of them said he was foolish, and none of them knew which was true. And then the war came. It did not come the way storms come, with a warning of dark clouds and a shift in the wind. It came the way a letter comes. A messenger arrived at the village square one afternoon, carrying orders from the provincial governor. Every young man in the valley was to report for military service. There was a conflict at the border, and soldiers were needed, and there would be no exceptions. The mothers wept. The fathers stood in grim silence. One by one, the young men of the village shouldered packs and walked down the road toward the garrison, and their families watched them go, and no one knew when they would return, or whether they would return at all. But the farmer's son did not go. He could not go. His leg was still bound in splints, and he could not walk more than a few steps without a crutch, and the officer who came to inspect him shook his head and marked him down as unfit for service, and the young man stayed home. And the war was long, and it was brutal, and many of the young men from the village did not come home. And the farmer's son sat on the porch through the long months of his recovery, watching the sky change, listening to the sound of his father's horse eating straw in the stable, and slowly, very slowly, his leg healed, and he walked again, and the world kept turning. The neighbors did not come to the farmer's door this time. They did not know what to say. They had run out of certainties, and the farmer stood in his stable that evening in the soft golden light that comes just before the sun drops below the hills. and he ran his hand along the old grey horse's neck, and he did not think about fortune or misfortune, about what had been gained or what had been lost. He thought about nothing at all. He stood there in the warmth and the quiet, and the horse chewed its straw, and the world did not ask him to name what had happened or to decide whether it was good or bad. It only asked him to be there, and he was. There's a silence that follows a story like this. Not the silence of an answer given, but the silence of a question that has softened itself into something you no longer need to solve. Let it rest, if it will. Let it settle the way dust settles after a cart has passed on a country road. There was a time, some months after the war ended, and the valley had returned to its slow rhythms of planting and harvest, when a stranger came to the village. He was not a merchant, nor a soldier, nor a monk. He was simply a man who had been walking for a long time, the kind of traveler who moves from place to place, not because he is going somewhere in particular, but because he has not yet found a reason to stop. His clothes were worn soft by weather and road dust, and his face had the particular openness of someone who has stopped trying to look like anything other than what he is. He had heard the story of the farmer and his horse. Travelers carry stories the way rivers carry leaves. They pick them up without meaning to, and set them down somewhere else, changed a little by the journey. By the time the story reached the stranger, it had been told and retold by innkeepers and cart drivers, and each telling had added its own small embellishment, and each teller had drawn its own conclusion. The innkeeper in the last town had told it as a tell about luck. A woman at a well had told it as a tell about fate. A merchant had told it as a warning about the dangers of wild horses. But the stranger was the kind of man who wanted to hear a story from the person who had lived it. And so he walked to the farmer's gate and asked if he might rest for a while and share a pot of tea. The farmer was not a man who turned away travelers. He set a pot of water on the fire and brought out 2 cups, simple clay cups, the kind that are made by village potters and carry no decoration, only the warmth of the tea they hold. The 2 men sat on the step of the farmer's house, and for a long time they said nothing. They watched the valley. The light was the color of ripe wheat. A few birds moved in slow circles above the far hill. After a while, the stranger said, "I've heard the story of your horse, the loss, the return, your son's injury, the war. It is told in many places now, but there is something that puzzles me." The farmer poured tea. He did not ask what it was. "Everyone who tells your story tells me what happened," the stranger said. "The horse left. The horse came back. Your son fell. The soldiers came. All of that is clear. But no one can tell me why you were never moved by any of it. They say you never wept when the horse was lost. You never celebrated when it returned. You never raged when your son was hurt. And when the young men went to war and your son was spared, you did not dance or give thanks. They call you calm, and some call you cold, and some call you wise. But I do not think it is any of these things. I think there is something else, and I have walked a long way to ask you what it is." The farmer held his tea in both hands. The steam rose between his fingers, thin and pale, and disappeared into the air the way breath disappears on a cold morning. "You have asked a very large question," the farmer said, "and I am afraid I have only a very small answer. He gestured toward the valley. The fields were golden. The river that ran along the bottom of the valley was low and slow, catching pieces of the sky in its surface. When I was young, the farmer said, I was like every man in this village. When something good happened, I called it good. When something bad happened, I called it bad. And I spent all my time trying to make sure that more good things would happen and fewer bad things. And I worried constantly about which was which. And I lay awake at night, trying to see into tomorrow so I could prepare myself for whatever was coming. He paused. A breeze moved through the grass at the edge of the yard, and the grass bent and straightened, like a crowd of small green creatures nodding in agreement. And then one year, the farmer continued, I planted my field in the spring. I planted it carefully. I chose the best seeds. I waited for the right rain. I did everything a careful farmer does. And a storm came in the summer and destroyed half of it. And I was angry. I was angry at the sky. I was angry at the rain. I was angry at the seeds for not being stronger. He sipped his tea. And then, in the autumn, the half that survived gave the richest harvest I had ever seen. The grain was taller and fuller than any I had grown before, because the storm had thinned the field, and the plants that remained had more room to grow, more sun, more water, more of everything they needed. And I stood in my field, holding an armful of that grain, and I realized something very simple. What was it? The stranger asked. That I'd been angry at the very thing that made the harvest possible. The storm was not separate from the harvest. The destruction was not separate from the abundance. They were one thing, seen at two different moments, and I had spent my energy being furious at the first half of a sentence before the second half had been spoken. The stranger sat with this for a long time. The tea grew cool in his cup. So, you do not judge what happens to you, the stranger said at last, as though testing the shape of the idea in his mouth. The farmer shook his head gently. It is not that I do not judge. I'm not so different from anyone. When the horse was gone, I missed it. When my son fell, my heart hurt. These things are natural. A man does not stop feeling because he has seen a few things. But I've learned not to finish the sentence before it is finished. I've learned not to close the book before the last page. When my neighbors come to my door and say, this is a bad thing, I think, perhaps not. The ink is still wet. The stranger looked at the farmer for a long moment. Then he looked out at the valley, where the river was catching the light and breaking it into small bright pieces and carrying them away downstream. And you are not afraid of not knowing? The stranger asked. Oh, I'm afraid sometimes, the farmer said. Everyone is afraid sometimes, but I have noticed that the fear of not knowing is worse than the not knowing itself. The not knowing is just silence. It is just the space before the next word. It is the pause between the lightning and the thunder. It is not comfortable, but it is not the thing we fear. What we fear is the story we tell ourselves about what might be waiting in that silence, and the story is almost always worse than what arrives. The stranger finished his tea. He set the cup down on the step beside him. He thanked the farmer for the tea and for the conversation, and he stood and gathered his pack, and he walked back toward the road. And at the gate, he turned and said, "What will you do now?" and the farmer said, "I will go feed the horse." The stranger smiled. He walked away, and his footsteps grew soft on the road, and the dust settled behind him, and the evening came on in its slow, familiar way, and the farmer went to the stable and stood with his horse, and the horse ate its straw, and neither of them asked what tomorrow would bring. In that same valley, in that same season, there came an afternoon when the sky changed its mind. All morning the air had been still and golden, the kind of warmth that sits on the skin like a hand resting on a shoulder. The farmers were in the fields. The children were running between the houses, playing a game that involved a great deal of shouting and a small leather ball. The old women were sitting in the shade of the persimmon trees, doing the kind of slow, rhythmic work, mending, shelling, sorting, that their hands knew so well they could do it with their eyes closed. And then someone looked up. To the west, above the line of the mountains, a bank of cloud had risen. It was not the kind of cloud that drifts in on a breeze, light and scattered, carrying nothing more than a brief shadow. This was a wall of cloud, dark as wet stone, the kind that presses the light out of the sky and makes the birds go silent. It moved with a purpose that the village could feel in its bones. Within an hour, the golden day was gone. The sky was the color of iron. The wind had come up, not gently, but in gusts, pulling at the laundry lines and rattling the shutters and making the old persimmon trees lean like tired men, leaning into a wind they cannot resist. The village gathered itself in. Doors closed, shutters latched. The children were called inside, and they pressed their faces to the windows, watching the sky with the particular wide-eyed fascination that children have for storms, because to them a storm is still a spectacle and not yet a threat. The adults moved differently. They moved with the tightness of people who have something to lose. The harvest was half gathered. The grain that was still in the fields was ripe and ready, and a heavy storm could flatten it, could turn a good season into a ruined one, could take the work of months and scatter it across the mud. An old man who had lived through many seasons stood in his doorway and said to anyone who would listen, "This is going to be bad. I've seen clouds like this before. When the sky turns this color, it means hail. It means we will lose the grain." And across the village, the farmer who had lost and found his horse was standing in his own doorway, looking at the same sky. His neighbor, a nervous woman who kept chickens and worried about everything, called to him from across the lane. "Do you see the clouds?" she said. "Do you see what is coming? This is terrible. We will lose everything." And the farmer looked at the sky, and he looked at his neighbor, and he said, "The clouds are dark. That is true, but they have not yet told us what they are carrying." The woman shook her head. "You always say that. You always say wait and see. But look at them. Anyone can see what those clouds mean. Anyone can see that the clouds are dark," the farmer said gently. "But the clouds themselves do not know yet what they will do. Sometimes the darkest clouds carry the gentlest rain." His neighbor went inside, unconvinced. She latched her door and gathered her chickens into their coop and sat in her kitchen and waited for the worst. The clouds came lower. The wind grew stronger. The light took on that strange, greenish cast that comes when the sky is thick with moisture and the sun is trying to push through from behind. And then the rain came. It did not come as a storm. It did not come with hail or thunder or the violent lashing that the old man had predicted. It came gently, in long, steady curtains of warm water, the kind of rain that does not beat the crops down, but washes them, the kind that soaks into the earth slowly and deeply instead of running off the surface in muddy streams. It was the rain that farmers pray for in a dry season, the patient, soaking rain that goes down to the roots and stays. It rained through the afternoon and into the evening, and by nightfall the air smelled of wet earth and growing things, and the fields had drunk more water than they had seen in weeks. And in the morning, when the sky cleared and the sun came out clean and bright, the grain that was still standing was straighter and taller than before, and the ground that had been cracking with dryness was soft and dark and fertile. The old man who had predicted hail stood in his doorway and looked at his fields, and he said nothing. The woman who kept chickens opened her coop and let her birds out into the wet grass, and she said nothing. And the farmer stood in his field with the rain still beating on the leaves around him, and he too said nothing. He did not say, "I told you so." He did not say, "You see." The dark clouds brought good rain. He said nothing at all, because he understood that this was not a moment for words. It was a moment for standing still, for letting the wet earth and the clean air and the tall grain speak for themselves, and for noticing that once again the story had refused to be the story everyone had decided it would be. The village went back to its harvest. The children went back to their game. The old women went back to their mending. And the clouds moved on, east, beyond the mountains, carrying whatever they were carrying to whatever valley was next. And if you had been standing in that valley on that particular morning after the rain, you would have noticed something very simple and very beautiful. The whole world smelled new. Not new in the way that new things smell, fresh, untouched, untested, new in the way that old things smell after they have been washed. The same soil, the same grass, the same trees, the same stone walls, but all of them rinsed clean, all of them holding the memory of the rain in their surfaces, all of them quietly, invisibly changed by something that had passed through in the night and left them exactly where they were, but not exactly what they had been. This is what the rain does. This is what all weather does, and all fortune and all misfortune. It passes through. It changes you. It leaves you where you are, and you go on. The farmer's horse was standing in the paddock that morning, its head raised, its nostrils wide, breathing in the new air with the particular attention that animals give to the world after a rain, as though the rain has rewritten the landscape in a language that only animals can read, and they need a moment to take it all in before they can resume their grazing. The horse stood there for a long time, breathing, just breathing, and the farmer stood at his gate and watched it, and neither of them needed to say that the morning was good. They both knew it. The way you know warmth, the way you know water, the way you know the feeling of standing still in a world that has just finished changing and is, for a brief, precious moment, at rest. There was a field at the edge of the village that belonged to no one in particular. It was common ground, the kind of place where anyone could plant if they wished, and over the years, Different families had used different corners of it, and the soil was rich from many seasons of different hands working it. In the spring of the year after the war, a young woman came to this field. She was not from the village. She had come from somewhere east, walking alone with a small bundle on her back and a look in her eyes that was not sadness exactly, but something quieter. The look of someone who has set something down and is not yet sure what to pick up next. She had lost her home in the war, not to violence, but to the slow collapse that follows violence. The fields left untended, the markets closed, the neighbors scattered. She had walked away from what was left and kept walking until she reached a place that still looked like a place where things could grow. She asked the village elder for permission to plant a small corner of the common field, and the elder, who was a kind man with a memory long enough to remember his own years of starting over, said yes. And so she knelt in the spring mud and began to plant. She worked carefully, pressing each seed into the earth with her thumb, spacing them evenly, row by row, the way she had been taught as a child. She did not know this soil. She did not know this valley's weather, its patterns of rain and sun, its hidden stones and unexpected frosts. She was planting in a place she did not fully understand, and every seed she pressed into the ground was an act of trust in something she could not see. The farmer, the one with the gray horse and the calm voice, passed by the field one afternoon while she was working. He stopped at the fence and watched her for a while. She was kneeling in the dirt, her hands dark with soil, her face focused with the particular concentration of someone who was doing the only thing they know how to do. "You are planting very carefully," the farmer said. The woman looked up. "I'm trying to, but I do not know this soil. I do not know if the seeds I brought will grow here. I do not know if there will be enough rain or too much. I do not know if the frost will come early or late." She sat back on her heels and looked at the rows of small mounds she'd made. "I do not know anything, really. I am just putting seeds in the ground and hoping." The farmer leaned on the fence. He looked at her rows. They were neat and even, the work of someone who knew what she was doing, even if she did not feel that she did. "May I tell you something?" he said. She nodded. "When I plant my own field," the farmer said, "I hold the seeds in my hand before I begin. 100 seeds, 200, and I know, I've always known, that not all of them will grow. Some will fall on stone. Some will be eaten by birds. Some will sprout and then fail for no reason I can understand. And some will grow tall and strong and give me more grain than I expected." He paused. A small bird landed on the fence post near his hand, cocked its head, and flew away again. "And here is what I've learned after many years of planting," the farmer continued. "I cannot tell, when I hold the seeds in my hand, which ones will grow and which ones will not. They all look the same. They all weigh the same. They all feel the same between my fingers. There is no way to separate the ones that will become grain from the ones that will become nothing. And so I plant them all. I give them all the same soil, the same depth, the same distance from one another. I do not hold any back because I suspect they might fail. I do not press any deeper because I hope they might succeed. I plant them all the same, and then I wait, and I let the rain and the sun and the earth do what they will do. The woman listened. Her hands were still in her lap, dark with the soil of a valley she did not yet know. "And you are never afraid?" she asked. "You are never afraid that you will do all this work and nothing will come of it?" "I'm often afraid," the farmer said, "but the fear does not change how I plant. If I let the fear decide which seeds to put in the ground and which to keep in my pocket, I would never plant at all. Fear makes a very poor farmer. It would have me inspect every seed and test every inch of soil and wait for perfect conditions, and by the time it was satisfied, the season would be over and the field would be bare." He looked out across the common field, where the spring light was turning the wet earth into something that almost glowed. "The bravest thing a farmer does," he said, "is not the plowing. It is not the harvesting. It is the planting. Because the planting is the moment when you give something away to something you cannot control, and you have to be willing to do that without knowing what you will get back. That is what planting is. It is the practice of not needing to know." The woman was quiet for a long time. The breeze moved across the field and bent the grass and moved on. Then she turned back to her work. She picked up another seed. She pressed it into the earth, and she moved to the next spot and the next, planting each one the same as the last. No favorites, no calculations, no attempt to read the future in the small dark shapes in her palm. The farmer watched her for a moment longer. Then he walked on toward his own field, where his own uncertain seeds were doing whatever they were doing beneath the surface of the soil, out of sight, beyond his reach, growing or not growing in their own time. In a village workshop, a little way up the valley from the farmer's house, there lived a potter. She was not young, and she was not old. She was the kind of age where the hands know more than the mind, where the body has memorized its craft so deeply that the thinking part of the work has fallen away, like a husk falling from a seed. Her name was May, and she made simple things: bowls, cups, plates, water jars, nothing ornamental, nothing intended for beauty. She made the things that people used every day without thinking about them: the cup that held your morning tea, the bowl that held your evening rice. And she made them well, with a quiet precision that came not from perfectionism, but from repetition, from years of sitting at the same wheel, in the same light, shaping the same clay into the same forms, until the shaping was as natural to her as breathing. But there was one part of her craft that she could not master, no matter how many years she practiced, and that was the kiln. The kiln was a large stone structure behind her workshop, blackened by decades of fire. She had built it herself years ago, with stones from the riverbed and clay from the hillside, and she had fired it hundreds of times, and she knew its moods the way a sailor knows the moods of the sea. She knew which winds made it burn hot and which made it sulk. She knew where the heat pooled and where it thinned. She knew the sound it made when the temperature was right and the sound it made when it was not. She knew the kiln better than she knew most people. And still, every time she loaded it, every time she stacked her careful bowls and cups on the stone shelves inside, and sealed the door and lit the fire, she did not know what would come out. Some firings were generous. She would open the door after the long hours of waiting and find every piece whole, every glaze settled into a smooth, even finish, every bowl singing with a clear, high note when she tapped it with her fingernail. These were the firings that made her feel that she understood her craft, that all her years of practice had given her a kind of mastery over the fire and the clay. And some firings were cruel. She would open the door and find cracks running through the walls of her best pieces, or glazes that had bubbled and blistered into textures that looked like disease, or bowls that had warped and slumped into shapes that no hand would want to hold. And there was never a reason she could find. The clay was the same. The glaze was the same. The temperature was as close to the same as she could make it. And still the fire did what it wanted, and she was left standing in the ashes of her expectations, holding a cracked bowl. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult firing, a firing in which she had lost more than half of her work to cracks and warps she could not explain, she carried the broken pieces out behind her workshop and sat on the ground with them in her lap. And she stared at them, and something in her began to tighten. Not anger exactly, something older and more familiar than anger. The feeling that comes when you have done everything right and the world has not cooperated, when your effort and your care have not been enough to control the outcome, and you are forced to confront the simple, infuriating fact that control was never yours to begin with. The farmer happened to be walking past her workshop on his way to the market. He saw her sitting there, surrounded by broken pottery, and he stopped. "A hard firing?" he asked. She looked up. "I do not understand it," she said. "I did everything the same as last time. The same clay, the same glaze, the same temperature, as near as I can measure. Last time, every piece came out whole. This time, half of them are ruined. There's no reason for it." The farmer sat down on the ground beside her. He picked up one of the cracked bowls and turned it in his hands. The crack ran through it like a river on a map, branching and forking, dividing the surface into territories of its own design. "It is a beautiful crack," he said. She looked at him as though he had said something absurd. "I mean it," he said. "Look at how it runs. It follows the clay's own nature, the places where the clay was thinnest, the places where the water had pooled during the shaping. The crack did not happen by accident, and it did not happen by malice. It happened because the clay and the fire had a conversation that you were not part of, and this is what they said to each other. But I do not want a conversation I'm not part of," May said. "I want to know what will happen. I want to load the kiln and know that my work will come out whole." "I understand," the farmer said. And he did understand, because this was the same thing everyone wanted, to put something into the fire and know in advance what would come back out, to plant a seed and know it would grow, to lose a horse and know it would return, to live a day and know what the next day would hold. "Let me ask you something," the farmer said, still holding the cracked bowl. "When you sit at your wheel and shape a bowl, do you know, in the moment your hands are on the clay, exactly what the bowl will become?" May thought about this. "Not exactly," she said. "The clay has its own way of moving. I have an intention, but the clay does not always follow my intention perfectly. Sometimes it thickens where I did not expect. Sometimes it thins. Sometimes it moves under my hands in a way that surprises me, and I follow it, and what comes out is different from what I planned." "And are those bowls the ones that surprised you?" Are they always worse than the ones you planned? She was quiet for a long moment. No, she said at last. Some of the best bowls I've ever made were accidents, shapes I did not intend, glazes that ran in ways I did not expect. There is a cup in my house that I drink from every morning, and it is my favorite thing I have ever made, and it was a mistake. The handle was too thick, and the rim was uneven, and the glaze pooled in the bottom in a way that looks like a small lake, and none of that was what I planned, but it fits my hand perfectly, and the tea tastes right in it, and I would not trade it for the most perfect cup I could imagine. The farmer set the cracked bowl down on the ground between them. The kiln is not your enemy, he said, and it is not your servant. It is a place where something happens that is partly yours and partly not yours, and the part that is not yours is not a mistake. It is the part where the world has its say. He stood up and brushed the dust from his clothes. I have a horse, he said, that once left me and came back with a wild companion, and the wild companion broke my son's leg, and the broken leg saved my son's life. I did not plan any of that. I did not understand any of that while it was happening. I only understood it later, and I understood it only partly, because the story is still going, and there are chapters I have not read yet. He looked at the cracked bowl one last time. Maybe fire it again, he said, with gold in the cracks. I have heard of potters who do that, who fill the breaks with something precious, so the breaking becomes part of the beauty, not because the breaking was good, but because it happened, and what you do with what happened is more interesting than wishing it had not. May sat there for a while after he left. The afternoon light moved across the ground, slow and warm. She picked up the cracked bowl and held it to the light, and she looked at the way the crack ran through it, the way it mapped the clay's own hidden nature, the conversation between fire and earth that she had not been part of, but that had happened nonetheless. She did not fire it again with gold, not that day, but she kept it. She set it on the shelf in her workshop, next to the cups and bowls that had survived, and every time she loaded the kiln after that, she looked at it before she sealed the door, and it reminded her of something she could not quite put into words, something about the space between control and surrender, between planning and letting go, between the hand that shapes the clay and the fire that finishes the conversation. In the same valley, though a little farther down the road, where the hills began to flatten and the fields gave way to orchards of persimmon and plum, there lived a young woman named Suki who wove cloth. She had learned the craft from her grandmother, who had learned it from her grandmother before that, so that the knowledge in Suki's fingers was very old, older than any living person in the valley, older than the oldest tree on the hill behind her house. She worked at a large wooden loom that had been built by her great-grandfather, a carpenter who had understood that some things are meant to outlast the people who make them. The loom was dark with age and smooth with use, and when Suki sat at it and began to work, the shuttle moving back and forth, the threads rising and falling in their steady rhythm, it made a sound like a slow, patient heartbeat. Suki was good at her craft. She could weave cloth so fine that it felt like water against the skin, and so strong that it would last for years without thinning or tearing. She could create patterns that seemed to move when the light hit them, geometric designs that repeated and varied and repeated again, like the patterns in a river's current or the patterns in the bark of an old tree. She was proud of her work, and rightly so, and the people of the valley prized her cloth and came from several villages away to buy it. But Suki had a problem, and the problem was this: she could not tolerate a broken thread. Every weaver knows that threads break. It is part of the nature of thread. It is spun from fiber, and fiber is organic, and organic things have weaknesses, and sometimes those weaknesses give way under tension, and the thread snaps. It is not a disaster. It is a small thing, a moment's interruption, easily mended by tying a knot and continuing. Every weaver deals with broken threads. It is as ordinary as a farmer dealing with weeds, or a potter dealing with air bubbles in the clay. But for Suki, a broken thread was not a small thing. A broken thread was a disruption. It was a flaw. It was the universe refusing to cooperate with her vision, and every time it happened, the small sharp snap, the sudden looseness in the fabric, the interruption of the pattern she had been building, something in her chest would tighten, and she would feel the particular frustration of someone who has planned everything carefully and finds that the world has not read the plan. She would stop the loom. She would stare at the broken thread. She would tie the knot carefully and precisely, trying to make it as small and invisible as possible, trying to erase the evidence of the break, to pretend it had not happened, to restore the illusion of control. And sometimes the knot held, and the pattern resumed, and she could breathe again. And sometimes the thread broke again, in the same place or a different one, and the frustration would rise again, sharper each time, and she would find herself gripping the shuttle so tightly that her knuckles went white, as though she could hold the whole world together by force of will. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at the loom, a day of many broken threads, a day when the fabric had refused to become what she had imagined, Suki walked out of her workshop and down the road toward the village, not because she was going anywhere, but because she needed to move, to let the tight feeling in her chest unwind itself in the rhythm of walking. She passed the farmer's house. He was sitting outside, as he often was in the evenings, on the low bench beside his door, watching the light change over the valley. His old grey horse was standing in the paddock behind the house, its head low, half asleep, the picture of an animal that has nowhere to be and nothing to prove. "You look like a person carrying something heavy," the farmer said. Suki stopped. She had not intended to stop, but something in his voice, the gentleness of it, the complete absence of judgment, made her feet slow and then still. "I'm carrying a cloth that will not be woven the way I want it to be woven," she said. "Tell me about it," the farmer said. And so she told him about the broken threads. She told him about the frustration, the tightness in her chest, the feeling that every break was a personal failure, a sign that she was not skilled enough, or careful enough, or patient enough to make the cloth she saw in her mind. She told him about the knots she tied, tiny and hidden, and how even though no one else could see them, she could always feel them, small hard lumps in the otherwise smooth fabric, reminders that the cloth was not what she had intended it to be. The farmer listened. He did not interrupt. He did not nod or shake his head or make the small encouraging sounds that people make when they are only half listening and want you to know they are present without actually attending to what you are saying. He simply listened, the way the earth listens to rain, without opinion, without resistance, simply receiving. When she was finished, he was quiet for a long while. Then he said, "Have you ever looked at the cloth from the other side?" The other side, the back of the fabric, the side that faces the loom while you work. Have you turned the cloth over and looked at the pattern from there? Suki frowned. Of course, every weaver checks the back. It shows where the threads cross and where the tension is. And what does it look like? The back? Suki thought about it. It looks like chaos, she said. Loose ends, knots, threads going in every direction. It looks nothing like the pattern on the front. It looks like a mess. But the mess is what holds the pattern together, the farmer said. Without the loose ends and the crossing threads and the knots on the back, the beautiful pattern on the front would not exist. The two sides are not separate things. They are the same cloth, seen from different angles, and neither side is the real one. They are both real. The beauty and the mess are the same fabric. Suki stood there in the evening light, her hands at her sides, and she did not speak. The farmer did not press her. He went back to watching the valley, and after a while, she walked on, and the evening folded itself around her, and the tight feeling in her chest had not gone away entirely, but it had changed shape, the way a fist changes shape when the fingers begin, very slowly, to open. The next morning she went back to her loom. A thread broke, as threads do. She stopped the shuttle and looked at the break, and for a moment the old frustration rose in her like a wave. But this time, she did not tie the knot right away. Instead, she reached under the loom and turned the cloth over, and she looked at the back, the tangle of crossings and loose ends, the knots from previous breaks, the complex, unplanned disorder that was the hidden architecture of the beautiful pattern on the front. She looked at it for a long time, and then she turned the cloth back over, and she tied the knot, and she continued weaving. The knot was not smaller this time, and it was not more invisible, but it bothered her less. It was part of the backside of the fabric. It was part of what held the pattern together. And outside, in the paddock, the farmer's horse stood in the morning sun, its head low, its eyes half closed, dreaming whatever horses dream, and the day went on in its ordinary, uncontrollable, unremarkable way. In the village, there was a young merchant whose name was Dao, and who had the particular misfortune of being intelligent. He was intelligent in the way that certain young people are, sharply, restlessly, with a mind that moved faster than the world around it and could not stop itself from racing ahead, trying to see around corners, trying to read the next page before the current one was finished. He could calculate the price of grain 3 seasons in advance. He could predict, with surprising accuracy, which traders would pass through the valley and when, and what they would want to buy and what they would be willing to pay. He could look at a crop in its early growth and estimate its yield, and he was almost always right. This intelligence had made him successful. By the time he was 25, he had a warehouse and 3 employees and a reputation in the valley as a man you could trust to make a profit. The older merchants respected him. The farmers liked him because he paid fair prices and did not try to cheat them, and because he seemed to genuinely understand the work of growing things, even though he had never planted a seed in his life. But the same mind that made Tao successful also kept him awake at night, because a mind that can see 3 seasons ahead can also imagine 3 seasons of disasters. A mind that can predict traders' movements can also predict wars and famines and droughts and floods and every other catastrophe that commerce depends upon not happening. And Tao's mind, lying in his bed in the dark, with no numbers to calculate and no traders to meet, would turn its considerable power toward the future and begin constructing scenarios. What if the rains come late this year? What if the river floods and destroys the road and the traders cannot pass? What if the price of grain falls because of a surplus in the eastern provinces? What if there is another war and the markets close? What if a fire destroys the warehouse? What if the new seeds he has bought turn out to be inferior? What if? What if? What if? The mind spun its threads into the darkness, weaving possibility after possibility, and each possibility branched into 3 more, and each of those into 3 more, and before long, the young merchant was lying in a web of imagined futures so dense that he could not find his way back to the present. He had tried everything. He had tried counting his breaths. He had tried drinking warm milk before bed. He had tried exhausting himself with physical work during the day, hoping that his body's tiredness would pull his mind down after it. Nothing worked. The mind was too fast, too agile, too convinced of its own importance. It believed, with the absolute certainty of a mind that has never been wrong, that if it stopped planning, if it stopped anticipating, if it stopped trying to see around every corner, then the world would catch him off guard and he would lose everything he had built. One evening, unable to sleep, Tao walked through the village in the dark. It was late, so late that even the dogs had stopped barking and the last of the lamps had been extinguished. The streets were empty. The sky was full of stars, more stars than he could count, each one a small, steady light that had been burning since long before he was born and would continue burning long after he was gone, indifferent to his plans and his profits and his carefully constructed scenarios. He found himself, without intending to, at the farmer's gate. The farmer was not asleep. He was sitting on his bench in the dark, as though he had been expecting a visitor, though he probably had not been. He was simply a man who sometimes sat in the dark and watched the stars, the way some people read books or tend gardens, not for any purpose, but because it was part of how he lived. "You are awake late," the farmer said. Tao leaned against the gate. "I'm always awake late," he said. "I cannot sleep." "Your body is tired." "My body is exhausted, but my mind will not stop. It is always running ahead, trying to see what is coming, trying to prepare for every possible thing that might happen. It believes that if it stops, even for a moment, something terrible will slip past it and catch me unprepared." The farmer nodded slowly, the kind of nod that is not agreement, but recognition, the nod of someone who has seen this particular kind of suffering before and does not need it explained. "Come sit," the farmer said. Tao opened the gate and sat on the bench beside the farmer. The bench was old wood, worn smooth by years of sitting, and it held the faint warmth of the day's sun, even now, in the cool of the night. They sat in silence for a while. The stars turned slowly overhead. A cricket sang somewhere in the grass, a high, thin sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Let me tell you about my horse," the farmer said, and he told Tao the story. The loss, the return, the wild horse, the broken leg, the war, the son who was spared. He told it simply, without embellishment, the way a man tells a story he has told many times and no longer needs to perform. Just the events one after another, like stones set in a row. When he was finished, Tao was quiet for a long time. "I know this kind of story," Tao said at last. "It is a teaching about not judging events as good or bad. I have heard similar teachings, but knowing the teaching does not help me sleep. My mind agrees with the principle. It thinks, yes, that is wise. Events should not be judged prematurely. And then it goes right back to calculating what will happen next, because the not judging does not turn off the predicting. They are different muscles, and the predicting muscle is much stronger." The farmer smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that comes when someone says something very honest. "You are right," the farmer said. "The story is not about not judging, or not only about that. The story is about something else." "What?" "It is about where I stand while the story is happening." Tao frowned. "Where you stand?" "When the horse was gone," the farmer said, "my neighbors came to my door and stood in the future. They looked at the empty stable and they saw a season of hardship stretching ahead. Fields unplowed, grain uncarried, a man ruined by one unlocked gate. They were not standing in the moment of the horse's absence. They were standing in the next season and the season after that, and they were already living in the suffering that had not yet happened." He paused. The cricket had stopped singing. The silence was very large. And when the horse came back with a companion, they stood in a different future. A future of abundance. 2 horses instead of 1. Twice the work done in half the time. They were not standing in the moment of the horse's return. They were standing in the harvest they imagined, in the prosperity they had already spent in their minds. "And you?" Tao asked. "Where were you standing?" "I was standing in the stable," the farmer said. "I was standing next to my horse. I was standing in the moment where the only true thing was that the horse was here, or that the horse was not here. And that moment, the moment where the only true thing is what is actually happening right now, that moment is very small. It is so small that the mind does not want to stay in it, because there is nothing to do there. There is no problem to solve, no scenario to construct, no risk to mitigate. There is only the horse eating straw. There is only the sound of chewing. There is only the warmth of the stable and the smell of hay. And the mind finds this unbearable because it has been trained to believe that its job is to run ahead and prepare. And a moment where no preparation is needed feels to the mind like a moment where it has failed. Tao stared at the stars. Something in his chest had shifted. Not a release, exactly, but a loosening, the way a fist loosens when the fingers begin to understand that they are not holding anything. But things do go wrong, Tao said. You cannot pretend they do not. Bad things happen. Markets collapse. Wars begin. Fires burn. If I do not prepare, I will lose everything. You may lose everything regardless, the farmer said. I do not say that to frighten you. I say it because it is true, and it is the thing your mind is trying to protect you from, and it cannot. No amount of planning will make you safe from loss. No amount of preparation will close every door that misfortune might walk through. Your mind is trying to do something that cannot be done, and it is exhausting itself in the attempt, and that exhaustion is what keeps you awake. Then what do I do? Tao asked, and there was something in his voice that was no longer the voice of a merchant calculating a problem, but the voice of a tired young man who wanted to sleep. You do not need to stop planning, the farmer said. Planning is part of your work, and you do it well. But when the day is over and the plans are made, and you are lying in your bed, that is not the time for planning. That is the time for lying in your bed. Your mind will try to convince you that there is one more thing to figure out, one more corner to see around, one more risk to anticipate. And it is lying. There is nothing more to figure out tonight. Everything that needs to be figured out will still be there in the morning, and it will not change its shape between now and then, simply because you are awake. He looked at Tao in the darkness. The young man's face was very still. The horse is in the stable, the farmer said. That is all that is happening right now. The stars are in the sky. The bench is under us. The grass is growing beneath our feet, so slowly that neither of us can see it. These are the only true things tonight. Everything else is a story your mind is telling you about a morning that has not come yet. Tao sat there for a long time, and he did not try to solve anything. He did not try to agree or disagree with what the farmer had said. He did not construct a counter-argument or a scenario or a plan. He sat on the bench and he felt the worn wood beneath him and the cool air on his face and the vast silence of the sky. And for a few minutes, maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe more, his mind, that restless, brilliant, exhausting mind, found nothing to do. And in that nothing, something happened. Not a revelation, not a breakthrough, just a small, quiet settling, like a stone finding the bottom of a pool. He thanked the farmer. He walked home. And that night, not because of anything he had decided or solved or planned, but because his mind had, for a few minutes, experienced the astonishing novelty of having nothing to do, he slept. Not well, not deeply, not the way a child sleeps, with the whole body surrendered. But he slept. And in the morning, the world was still there, exactly as he had left it, with all its risks and uncertainties and unplannable futures intact. And his warehouse was still standing, and his employees were at their posts, and the traders were on the road, and the grain was in the field, and nothing had changed while he was asleep. Nothing except that he had rested, and that was enough. In a cove along the river that ran through the bottom of the valley, where the water slowed and widened and became almost still, there lived an old fisherman. He had no family that anyone knew of. He lived alone in a small hut made of river stones and thatch, and every morning, before the sun had cleared the mountains, he pushed his small wooden boat into the water and rowed out to the middle of the cove and cast his net. His name was Juan, and he had been fishing in the same cove for so many years that the villagers had stopped counting. He was as much a part of the landscape as the river itself. The children grew up seeing him there in the early light, his small boat floating on the mist, his arms moving in the slow, practiced rhythm of a man casting a net, and by the time they were old enough to ask who he was, they already knew, the way they knew the names of the hills and the color of the sky before rain. Juan did not speak much. He was not unfriendly. When he came to the village market to sell his catch, he would nod and smile and accept the coins he was given without haggling, and if someone asked him a question, he would answer it, briefly and accurately, the way a man answers who has spent so much time in silence that words have become a kind of currency he spends carefully. But he did not seek conversation. He did not come to the village gatherings or the seasonal festivals. He stayed near the river, and the river stayed near him, and the two of them seemed to have an understanding. One morning, a young monk from the temple on the hill above the village came down to the cove. He was new to the temple. He had arrived only a few months ago, and he still had the particular intensity of someone who is trying very hard to be peaceful, which is, of course, the opposite of being peaceful. He had come to the river to meditate because someone at the temple had told him that the sound of water was good for meditation, and he believed this the way earnest young people believe things, completely, without nuance, as though the instruction were a recipe and peace were a dish that could be cooked if you followed the steps precisely. He sat on the bank and closed his eyes and tried to meditate, but the sound of Juan's net hitting the water kept interrupting him. A soft, spreading splash every few minutes, followed by the quiet sound of the net sinking, followed by the slow scraping of rope as the old man drew it back in. After a while, the young monk gave up and opened his eyes and watched the fisherman instead. "May I ask you something?" the young monk called across the water. Juan looked up. He did not seem surprised to find someone watching him. He nodded. "How do you know where to cast the net?" the young monk asked. "The water is dark. You cannot see the fish. How do you know where they are?" Juan drew his net in slowly. It was empty. He shook it out, letting the water drip from its edges, and then he cast it again, in a different direction this time, with the same slow, practiced motion. The net spread in the air like a wing, hung for a moment against the sky, and then fell flat on the surface of the water and sank. "I do not know where they are," Juan said. The young monk frowned. "But you have been fishing here for many years. Surely you have learned where the fish gather, which spots are best at which times of day, which seasons bring which kinds of fish." "I've learned some of that," Juan said. "I know that the fish like the shallows in the morning and the deep places in the afternoon. I know that they follow the current when the river is high and stay in the eddies when it is low. I know many things about fish." He drew the net in again. This time, there were 3 small fish in it, silver and flickering, twisting against the mesh. He removed them gently, one by one, and placed them in the basket at the bottom of his boat. But knowing where the fish usually are is not the same as knowing where they are right now, he said. Right now, in this moment, the fish are wherever they are. They do not consult my knowledge. They do not follow my predictions. They move through the water according to their own nature, and their own nature changes from moment to moment, and all my years of experience cannot tell me with certainty where the next fish is. The young monk considered this. Then how do you decide where to cast? I cast, Juan said simply. I choose a direction, sometimes based on my experience, sometimes based on a feeling I cannot explain, sometimes based on nothing at all, and I cast, and then I wait, and then I draw the net in, and I see what the water has given me. Sometimes it gives me fish, sometimes it gives me weeds, sometimes it gives me nothing at all, and then I cast again. And you are not frustrated when the net comes back empty. Juan looked at the young monk for a long moment. Then he looked at the water, which was holding the early light in its surface, like a mirror holding a face, reflecting everything and grasping nothing. When I was young, Juan said, I was frustrated every time. Every empty net was a failure. Every missed cast was proof that I did not know enough, that I was not skilled enough, that the river was withholding something it owed me. And I would cast harder and more often and with more desperation, as though I could force the river to yield what I wanted by sheer effort. He cast the net again. The motion was so smooth, so unhurried, that it seemed less like an action and more like a continuation of the river's own movement, as though the net were a part of the water, and the water were a part of the net, and the casting were not a human thing at all, but a natural event, like a wave rising and falling. And then one day, Juan continued, I realized that the river does not owe me fish. The fish do not owe me their presence. I'm a guest in their world. I lower my net into their home, and sometimes they are there, and sometimes they are not, and the net does not make the fish appear. The net only receives what is already present, and all my frustration was the frustration of a man who believed he was owed something by the water, and the water had never agreed to such an arrangement. The young monk sat very still. The light was changing on the water, growing brighter, turning from silver to gold as the sun climbed higher. But you still cast the net, the young monk said. Of course, Juan said, that is what I do. That is what a fisherman does. I cast the net, but I cast it now without believing that I know what it will bring back. I cast it the way the river flows, because that is what rivers do, and because this is what I do, and neither of us needs to know the ending before we begin. He drew the net in once more. 2 fish this time, a little larger than the last. He removed them and placed them in his basket with the same gentle care, as though each one were a gift rather than a product of his skill. Your meditation, he said to the young monk. You came here to find peace, yes? The young monk nodded. And you sat on the bank and closed your eyes and waited for peace to arrive. And when it did not arrive, you were frustrated because you had done the right thing. You had come to the river. You had sat in the correct posture. You had closed your eyes, and still peace had not come. The young monk looked down. Yes, he said quietly. That is exactly what happened. You are cast in a net for peace, Juan said. And you believe that if you cast it correctly, in the right spot, at the right time, with the right technique, peace will be in the net when you draw it back. But peace is not a fish. It is not waiting for you in a particular spot in the river. It is the river itself. It is the casting. It is the waiting. It is the drawing in. It is the empty net and the full net and the space between them. You do not need to catch peace. You are already in it. You have been in it since you sat down. The young monk looked at the water. The river moved past him, slow and unhurried, carrying leaves and light and small reflections of the sky, and it did not seem to be going anywhere in particular. and it did not seem to mind. He sat there for a long time after that. He did not close his eyes. He did not try to meditate. He just sat and watched the old fisherman cast and draw in the ancient, patient rhythm of a man who had stopped needing the river to give him anything at all. The sun climbed higher. The mist on the water burned away, the way all mist burns away when the light grows strong enough. Not violently, not suddenly, but gently, gradually, thinning and lifting until the water was clear and bright and the far bank was visible, and the whole cove lay open and shining in the morning light. And the fish were there, or they were not, somewhere beneath the surface, following currents that no eye could see, drawn by instincts that no mind could map, alive in a world that ran on its own logic and owed no one its presence. The young monk walked back up the hill toward the temple, and he did not meditate that day, not in the way he had been trying to. He simply went about his duties, sweeping the path, washing the bowls, carrying water from the well. And in each task, he noticed, as though for the first time, that the task itself was a kind of casting. The broom was the net, the path was the water, and the sweeping was not preparation for something else. It was the thing itself, complete, sufficient, already enough. In the mountains above the valley, where the air was thin and cool, and the trees grew gnarled and close together like old friends leaning on each other for support, there was a clearing where an archery teacher lived. He was not a soldier and had never been one. He was a man who had spent his whole life studying the relationship between the bow and the arrow and the hand that holds both, and he had come to believe that this relationship was the closest thing he knew to a map of how human beings live. The tension, the aiming, the holding, and the inevitable, necessary letting go. His name was Master Ren, and he lived alone in a small hut at the edge of the clearing, with a straw target set up on the far side and a wooden rack beside his door, holding 3 bows of different sizes. Seekers came to him sometimes, young soldiers who wanted to learn to shoot, hunters who wanted to improve their aim, and occasionally someone who had heard that the old archery teacher in the mountains taught something more than marksmanship, though they could never quite say what it was. One autumn afternoon, a young man came up the mountain path. He was not a soldier or a hunter. He was a scholar, a reader of books, a student of philosophy, a person who had spent his life in the world of ideas and found that ideas, while beautiful, did not stop his hands from shaking when the world became uncertain. He had come because someone had told him that Master Ren could teach him to stop being afraid. "I'm afraid of the future," the young scholar said, standing at the edge of the clearing, his pack on his back, his breathing hard from the climb. "I'm afraid of what I do not know. I am afraid that I will make the wrong choice, take the wrong path, and ruin my life before I understand what I have done. I've read every book I can find about wisdom and acceptance and the nature of impermanence, and I understand all of it, and none of it has helped. My mind still races ahead into tomorrow and the day after and the year after, and it builds disaster after disaster, and I cannot make it stop." Master Ren was sitting on a stump near the target, whittling a small piece of wood. He did not look up. "Do you know how to shoot a bow?" he asked. "No," the scholar said. "Good. Come here." He gave the scholar a bow, the middle-sized one, neither the largest nor the smallest, and a single arrow. He showed him how to stand, how to nock the arrow, how to draw the string back to his cheek. The scholar's hands were clumsy at first, the way all untrained hands are, but he was a quick learner, and soon he was standing with the bow drawn, the arrow pointing at the straw target across the clearing, his arm trembling slightly with the effort of holding the string taut. "Now," Master Ren said, "tell me where the arrow will go." The scholar squinted at the target. "I am aiming at the center," he said. "If I release it correctly, it should hit the center." "Should," Master Ren said. "Will it?" "I do not know. I have never shot before. The wind might push it. My hand might shake. I might release the string wrong. There are many things that could go wrong." "Yes," Master Ren said, "there are. So what do you want to do?" The scholar frowned. His arm was beginning to ache from holding the bow drawn. "I want to know that it will hit the center before I release it." "And can you know that?" "No, not for certain." "Then what are you doing right now?" "You are holding the string. The arrow is ready. The target is there. What are you waiting for?" The scholar's jaw tightened. "I'm waiting until I feel certain." "And when will you feel certain?" I do not know." "You will not," Master Ren said. "That is the answer. You will never feel certain. Not before the first arrow. Not before the 1,000th. Certainty is not what archery teaches. It is not what life teaches. You are waiting for a feeling that does not exist. And while you wait, your arm grows tired, and the bow grows heavy, and the moment passes. The scholar's arm was shaking now. The arrow trembled on the string. "Release it," Master Ren said, "but I do not know where it will go." "Release it," the scholar exhaled. He opened his fingers. The string snapped forward, and the arrow flew across the clearing, and it hit the target, not in the center, but in the outer ring, low and to the left, the mark of a first attempt, imperfect and earnest and real. Master Ren walked across the clearing and pulled the arrow from the target. He brought it back and handed it to the scholar again. "What did you learn?" he asked. The scholar looked at his hands. They were red from the string, and they were still shaking, but the shaking was different now. Not the shaking of effort, but the shaking that comes after effort, the trembling of a body that has done something it was afraid to do. "I learned that the arrow went somewhere," the scholar said. "Yes, the arrow always goes somewhere. That is what arrows do. You cannot control exactly where. You can aim, you can practice, you can learn to read the wind and steady your hand. But at the moment of release, at the moment when your fingers open and the arrow leaves the string, the arrow becomes the arrow's own. It belongs to the air. It belongs to the wind. It belongs to the distance between here and there. And you are no longer part of its story. You have done your part. The rest is not yours." The scholar knocked the arrow again. He drew the string. This time, his hands shook less. "The future is the arrow after it leaves the string," Master Ren said. "You can aim. You should aim. Aim carefully. Aim thoughtfully. Aim with all the skill you have. But then release. Let the arrow go. Let it fly into the space you cannot see, into the wind you cannot control, toward a target that may or may not be where you think it is, because the alternative is to hold the string forever, arms shaking, waiting for a certainty that will never come, growing more and more tired while the moment passes you by, The scholar released the arrow. It struck the target higher this time, closer to the center, though still not where he had aimed. "Better," Master Ren said. "Not perfect, not where you planned, but closer, and you will never know, before you release, whether the shot will be closer or farther than the last. That is the practice. That is all the practice is. You aim, you release, you watch, you adjust, you aim again. You never arrive at certainty. You arrive, if you are lucky, at something better than certainty." "What is better than certainty?" the scholar asked. Master Ren looked at the sky. The light was beginning to change, the way mountain light does in the late afternoon, turning from sharp and clear to soft and amber, as though the air itself were remembering something warm. "Trust," he said. "Not trust that the arrow will hit the center. Not trust that the future will be kind. Trust that the releasing is the right thing. Trust that the moment of letting go, the moment when you open your fingers and the arrow leaves you, is not a failure of control. It is the completion of the act. It is the only thing that was ever asked of you." The scholar stood there in the clearing for a long time after that, holding the bow, feeling the weight of it, the tension of the string against his fingers, the quiet presence of the arrow waiting to fly, and he thought about all the futures he had constructed in his mind, all the scenarios he had built and feared and tried to prepare for, and he realized that they were all arrows he had never released, strings he had held taut for years, arms aching, waiting for a certainty that was never going to come. He drew the bow one more time. He did not aim as carefully this time. He felt the tension. He felt the readiness of the arrow. He felt the moment when the string wanted to go, and he let it go. The arrow flew into the clearing and struck the target cleanly, just above the center. Not perfect, not exactly where he had aimed, but true as a first arrow can be, as true as any arrow ever is. And the sound the string made when it released, that high singing vibration that hangs in the air for a moment after the arrow is gone, sounded to the scholar very much like the sound of a question that has finally stopped needing an answer. In the valley below the mountains, in a house that sat at the end of a lane where the persimmon trees grew so thickly that their branches met overhead and made a kind of tunnel, there lived an old woman named Grandmother Chen. She was very old, so old that the children of the village were not sure whether she had always been old or whether they simply could not imagine her being anything else, the way they could not imagine the mountains being anything other than mountains, or the river being anything other than a river. Grandmother Chen had a habit. It was a small habit, not visible to most people, and she carried it for so long that it had become as much a part of her as her white hair, or her slow, careful walk, or the way she tilted her head when she listened to someone speak. The habit was this: she carried stones in her pockets, not large stones, small ones, smooth and round, the kind that rivers make when they tumble ordinary rocks for years and years until all the sharp edges are worn away, and what remains is something so smooth it almost feels like something alive. She had collected them over decades, from riverbeds, from roadsides, from the gardens of houses where she had stopped to rest on long walks. She had so many now that she kept them in a clay jar beside her bed, and every morning she would choose a handful and slip them into the pockets of her robe, and they would ride there all day, clicking softly against each other when she walked, a quiet percussion that was as familiar to her as the beating of her own heart. Each stone was a worry. She had never decided this consciously. It had begun long ago, when she was young and her husband had gone to the city for work, and she had not known whether he would return safely, and she had picked up a stone from the path outside her house and held it in her hand, and the weight of it, the solid, real, physical weight, had given her something to hold that was not the worry itself. The worry was formless, shapeless, impossible to put down because it had no edges, no surface, no weight. But the stone was real. She could close her fingers around it. She could feel its smoothness. She could put it in her pocket and carry it with her. And somehow the carrying of the stone made the carrying of the worry feel more manageable, as though the worry had been given a body, and a body could be set down in a way that a formless dread could not. Her husband had returned safely, but by then she had a second stone for a different worry. Something about the crop that year, or the health of a neighbor, or a noise she had heard in the night that she could not explain, and then a third, and a fourth. And over the years, the stones had accumulated, one for each worry that had passed through her life, and she had never put any of them down. She carried stones for her children's safety, even though her children were grown and had children of their own. She carried stones for the weather, for the harvest, for the health of the village elder, for the state of the road after heavy rain. She carried stones for things that had already happened and could not be changed, and stones for things that had not happened yet and might never happen. She carried stones for other people's troubles, troubles she had overheard in the market or at the well, troubles that did not belong to her, but that she had picked up anyway, the way a person picks up a stone from a path, without thinking, without deciding, simply because it was there and her hand was empty. Her pockets were always full, her robe hung heavy on her shoulders, and she had grown so accustomed to the weight that she no longer noticed it, the way a person living near a waterfall no longer hears the roar. It had become the background of her life, constant and invisible and enormously heavy. One autumn afternoon, the farmer, the one with the grey horse and the calm voice, was walking along the lane of persimmon trees when he saw Grandmother Chen sitting on the bench outside her house. She was not doing anything. She was simply sitting, her hands in her lap, her eyes half closed, her face turned toward the late afternoon sun. But even in her stillness, there was something heavy about her, as though the air around her were denser than the air around anyone else, as though she was sitting inside a weight that only she could feel. The farmer stopped. He had known Grandmother Chen for many years. She had been old when he was young, and she had been carrying stones for as long as he could remember. "You look tired today, Grandmother," he said. She opened her eyes. "I'm always tired," she said. "I have been tired for so long that I have forgotten what not tired feels like." The farmer sat down on the bench beside her. It was a wide bench made of a single slab of stone, and it was warm from the sun. "May I ask you something?" he said. She nodded. "Your stones, the ones in your pockets, do you still know what each one is for?" Grandmother Chen was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her left pocket and pulled out a handful of smooth river stones. They lay in her palm, gray and brown, and one almost white, each one polished by years of handling. "This one," she said, touching the largest, "is for my eldest daughter. She married a man who travels often, and I worry about him on the road. And this one? This one is for the old bridge over the creek. The planks are loose, and someone might fall. And this one," she looked at the smallest stone, the nearly white one. She held it up to the light. "I do not remember," she said. "I've been carrying it for a very long time, and I have forgotten what worry it belongs to. But I keep it anyway, because it might be important." The farmer looked at the stone in her hand. It was very smooth, very small, very light. It could not have weighed more than a few grams, but in her palm, surrounded by the others, it seemed to carry the weight of all the unnamed fears a person accumulates over a long life. The fears that have lost their names, but not their gravity. The worries that have faded into something wordless and ambient, like a hum that will not stop. "Grandmother," the farmer said gently, "may I tell you something I have noticed?" "Tell me." "I have noticed that you carry the stones, but the stones do not carry the worries. The worry about your daughter's husband. Is he safer because you carry this stone?" "No," she said. "The bridge over the creek. Are the planks less loose because this stone is in your pocket?" "No." "And this small white stone, the one whose worry you have forgotten, is whatever it was for still happening because you keep carrying it?" Grandmother Chen looked at the stones in her hand. The afternoon light fell across them, warm and amber, and they looked, in that light, like very small, very ordinary things. They were not talismans. They were not magic. They were not holding anything together. They were just stones. "I know this," she said quietly. "I know the stones do not help. I know the worries do not change because I carry them. I have always known this." "Then why do you carry them?" She was quiet for a long time. The persimmon trees rustled overhead. A fruit, overripe and heavy, fell from a branch and landed softly on the grass, and neither of them moved to pick it up. "Because I'm afraid of what will happen if I set them down," she said at last. "I'm afraid that the moment I stop carrying the worry, the thing I am worried about will happen, as though my worrying is a kind of vigilance, a kind of watching, and if I stop watching, the world will take advantage of my inattention and something terrible will slip through." The farmer nodded. He understood this. He understood it because it was the most human thing in the world. The belief that our worry is a form of protection, that our fear is a form of love, that if we stop being afraid for the people we care about, we are somehow abandoning them, leaving them unguarded against a world that is full of sharp edges and sudden losses. "May I tell you about my horse?" he said, and he told her the story, as he had told it to the stranger and to the young merchant, and to anyone who sat beside him long enough to hear it. The loss, the return, the injury, the war, the son who was spared. He told it simply, and she listened, and when he was finished, the stones were still in her hand, and the light was still warm, and the persimmon tree was still dropping its heavy fruit into the grass. "The horse left," the farmer said, "and I did not carry a stone for it. The horse came back, and I did not carry a stone for that either. My son fell, and I felt the pain of it in my chest, like a fist closing, but I did not pick up a stone. And when the war came and my son was spared, I did not pick up a stone of gratitude either. I did not pick up anything. I let each thing happen, and I let each thing pass. And I found that the things happened and passed, regardless of whether I held onto them or not. But how? Grandmother Chen asked. How do you let them pass? The worry comes, and it feels like a real thing. It has weight. It has texture. It takes up space in my chest. How do you let something pass that feels so solid? By noticing that the solidity is something you are adding to it, the farmer said. The worry is a thought. It has no weight. It has no texture. It takes up no space. You are the one who gives it weight by picking up a stone. You are the one who gives it texture by rubbing the stone smooth with years of handling. You are the one who gives it space by keeping it in your pocket close to your body. The worry is not solid. You have made it solid, and what you have made, you can unmake. Grandmother Chen looked at the stones in her palm. She looked at them for a very long time, and then slowly, so slowly that the farmer almost missed it, she leaned forward and set them on the ground at her feet. Not all of them, not the one for her daughter or the one for the bridge, but the small white one, the one whose worry she had forgotten, the one she had been carrying for so many years that it had worn itself smooth against the fabric of her robe and the skin of her hand. She set it on the ground, and she sat back up, and she put her hands in her lap, and she waited. Nothing happened. The sky did not darken. The wind did not rise. The earth did not shake. The world went on exactly as it had been going on, with the same light and the same breeze and the same slow dropping of fruit from the persimmon trees. That is all it is, the farmer said softly. You set it down, and the world does not notice, because the world was never being held up by your worry. It was holding itself. Grandmother Chen sat on the bench for a long time after the farmer left. She did not pick the stone back up. She did not reach for it. She sat with her hands in her lap, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, her left pocket was a little lighter, and the lightness felt strange, the way all new things feel strange, and also like something she might, if she practiced, get used to. The stone lay on the ground in the last of the afternoon light, warm and smooth and unburdened by the meaning she had given it. It was just a stone. It had always been just a stone. Far above the village, where the river narrowed to a stream, and the stream narrowed to a thread of water running between stones, there was a stretch of forest where the trees were very old and very tall. They were so tall that their tops disappeared into the mist on cool mornings, and the light that reached the forest floor was soft and green and had the quality of light that has traveled a long way to get where it is. In this forest, a woodcutter worked. His name was Bo, and he had been cutting wood in these mountains since he was a young man, and the years of swinging an axe had given him arms like the roots of the trees he felled, and a patience that came not from temperament, but from experience, from years of working with material that did not hurry, that grew at its own pace, and fell at its own pace, and dried at its own pace, indifferent to the wishes of the man with the axe. Bo lived simply. He cut wood. He carried it down the mountain. He sold it in the village. He bought rice and salt, and sometimes a small flask of rice wine, and he carried these back up the mountain and ate and drank and slept and woke and cut more wood. His life had the particular rhythm of a life that has found its groove, steady, predictable, so regular that the days blurred together and the seasons were the only markers of time. But one morning, Bo woke and found that the world had changed while he slept. The stream that ran past his hut, the small, reliable stream that he had drunk from every morning, that he had washed his face in and filled his cooking pot from, that had been flowing in the same bed between the same stones for as long as he had lived there, had moved. During the night, something had happened in the earth. Not an earthquake, nothing so dramatic, just a slow, quiet shift, the kind of movement that the earth makes when it is adjusting itself, the way a person adjusts their weight while sleeping, rolling from one side to the other without waking. A section of the bank had given way, and the water, finding the new channel easier than the old one, had simply gone. It had moved 20 paces to the east, cutting a new path through the soft earth, finding its way between different stones, past different trees, to a new resting place that it seemed perfectly content with, as though it had always been there. Bo stood at the edge of where the stream had been. The old bed was still wet, the stones still dark with moisture, but the water was gone. He could hear it, a few dozen paces away, on the other side of a thicket of young bamboo, running along happily in its new channel, as though nothing had happened, as though this new path were the most natural thing in the world. He went to look at it. The new channel was narrower than the old one, but deeper, and the water ran faster here, because the slope was a little steeper, and the sound it made was different, higher, brighter, like a voice that has moved from one room to another and found better acoustics. Bo stood there and felt something he could not name. It was not grief, because the stream was not gone. It was not anger, because the stream had done nothing wrong. It was something more like the feeling you have when you wake from a dream in which everything was the same, except one thing was different, and you cannot decide whether the difference matters or not. He brought his water pot to the new stream and filled it. The water tasted the same. It was the same water, the same rain, the same snowmelt, the same underground springs feeding it from the same mountains. Only the path had changed. The water was the water. It did not care which stones it ran between. That afternoon, Bo walked down to the village. He did not usually come down during the week. He preferred the quiet of the mountain and the steady rhythm of his work. But something about the moved stream had unsettled him, not because it mattered practically, but because it had shown him something about the nature of things that he had not been ready to see, and he needed to sit with someone who understood things that are not easy to put into words. He found the farmer in his field, doing the slow, careful work of clearing stones from the soil. It was the kind of work that is never finished. The earth always pushes up new stones, as though it has an inexhaustible supply of them hidden beneath its surface, and the farmer's job is not to eliminate them, but to move them, season after season, making room for the roots that need room and the seeds that need soil. "My stream moved," Bo said. The farmer straightened up. He had a stone in his hand, an ordinary field stone, rough and irregular, nothing like Grandmother Chen's smooth river stones, and he set it on the wall he was building, at the edge of the field, adding it to the row of other display stones, each one a small piece of the earth's refusal to be predictable. "Moved where?" the farmer asked. "East, about 20 paces. The bank gave way during the night. The water found a new channel." "Is it still flowing?" "Yes, it is flowing well. Better than before, maybe. The new channel is deeper." "Then what troubles you?" Bo sat down on the stone wall. He was a large man, and the wall seemed barely adequate to hold him. But it did, the way things that look insufficient often turn out to be enough. "It troubles me because I did not expect it," he said. "I've lived beside that stream for 15 years. I knew it. I knew the sound it made. I knew the stones it ran between. I knew the way the light hit the water in the morning, and the way the water slowed in the dry season and quickened in the wet season. I knew it the way you know a friend, by its habits, by its constancies, by the things that do not change. And then, without warning, without any sign I could have read or prepared for, it moved, just like that, in one night, as though 15 years of flowing in the same bed meant nothing." The farmer leaned against the wall beside Bo. He wiped his hands on his trousers, and the dust on his hands left pale marks on the cloth. "Did the water change?" the farmer asked. "No, the water is the same." "Did the mountain change?" "Not that I can see." "Then what changed?" Bo thought about it. "The channel changed. The path changed. The way the water gets from there to here." "And you depended on the path," the farmer said. "Yes. I built my hut near the old path. I built my life around the old path. I knew where to go for water, and I went there every morning, and every morning the water was there. And now it is not there. It is somewhere else. And I feel as though the world has broken a promise it never made." The farmer smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, the kind that comes from recognition rather than amusement. "The world does not make promises," the farmer said. "That is the thing about the world. It does not promise that the stream will stay. It does not promise that the harvest will be good. It does not promise that the horse will not leave, or that the sun will not fall. It simply is, and it changes. And it changes not because it is unreliable, but because changing is what it does. The water does not flow in one channel because it promised to. It flows in that channel because, for a while, that was the easiest path. And when the earth shifts and a new path opens, the water follows the new path, because that is the nature of water. It does not betray the old path. It simply goes where the going is." "But I cannot carry my hut 20 paces east every time the stream decides to move," Bo said. "No," the farmer agreed. "But you can carry your pot. You can walk the 20 paces. You can learn the sound the water makes in its new channel. You can let the old path dry and the new path deepen, and you can drink from whatever path the water chooses, because the water is the water, and it does not owe you its root." Bo sat there for a while, feeling the sun on his back, and the stone wall beneath him, and the quiet company of a man who seemed to understand that some things do not have solutions, only adjustments. "When your horse left," Bo said at last, "did you move your stable?" The farmer laughed. It was a soft, genuine laugh, the kind that rises from the belly without being invited. "I left the stable where it was," the farmer said, "and when the horse came back, it knew where to go. But if it had not come back, If it had found a new pasture and stayed there, I would not have torn the stable down. I would have let it stand. An empty stable is still a stable. It does not stop being useful because the thing it was built for has moved on. It waits, and sometimes what comes back to it is not what left, but something else, something unexpected, and the stable does not mind because a stable does not have preferences. It simply holds whatever arrives. Bo looked out across the valley. The river at the bottom, the big river, the one the village was named for, was glinting in the afternoon light, broad and slow and ancient. It too had moved many times in its long life. The old riverbed, dry and grassy now, could still be seen in the shape of the land, a wide, shallow depression running parallel to the current course, a memory of water written in the earth. Rivers move, the farmer said, following Bo's gaze. Streams move, roads shift, people change. The things we build our habits around are not the things themselves. They are the paths the things happen to be taking at this moment. And when the path changes, we have a choice. We can stand at the old path and mourn the water that is no longer there, or we can pick up our pot and walk to where the water went. Bo stood up from the stone wall. He looked at the farmer, and something in his face had settled. Not resolved, not answered, but settled, the way sediment settles in a glass of water that has been stirred and then left alone. I will go home, he said. I will bring my pot to the new stream. I will learn its sound. Good, the farmer said. And if it moves again? Then you will learn a new sound, the farmer said. And that sound will be just as good as the last one, because the sound is not the stream, and the stream is not the path, and the path is not the water, and the water is just the water, doing what water does, which is to go where the going is, without asking anyone's permission, and without breaking any promises it never made. Bo walked back up the mountain. The air grew cooler as he climbed, and the trees grew closer together, and by the time he reached his hut, the afternoon had softened into early evening, and the light had that amber quality that comes when the sun is low and the air is still, and everything looks as though it has been brushed with gold. He could hear the stream, not where it used to be, not in the old, familiar place between the familiar stones, but a little farther east, on the other side of the bamboo thicket, running in its new channel, making its new sound, which was not better or worse than the old sound, but simply different. The way tomorrow is not better or worse than today, but simply different. The way every moment is not better or worse than the last, but simply the next one, arriving without announcement, requiring nothing but attention. He filled his pot. He drank. The water tasted the same. It had always tasted the same. It would always taste the same, because the water did not change when its path changed, and maybe, neither did he. At the edge of the village, where the cultivated land gave way to wildflower meadows, and the meadows gave way to scrubby hillside, there was a small house surrounded by wooden boxes. The boxes were arranged in neat rows, facing south, and from a distance, they looked like a miniature village of their own, a village of small, patient inhabitants going about their business with a focus and a singleness of purpose that the human village could only envy. These were beehives, and the man who tended them was called Old Sung. Old Sung had kept bees for most of his adult life. He had started when he was young, with a single hive given to him by his uncle, and over the decades the single hive had become 2, and 2 had become 4, and 4 had become 12, and now there were 20 hives standing in the meadow behind his house, and each one held a world, a dense, thrumming, deeply organized world of 10,000 or more small lives, each one following a logic that old Sung had spent his whole life observing and had never fully understood. This was the thing about bees that fascinated old Sung and that humbled him. He had spent 40 years watching them. He had read everything he could find about them. He knew their seasons, their dances, their diseases, their preferences. He knew which flowers they favored and which they avoided. He knew the sound a healthy hive made, a low, steady hum, like the sound of contentment itself, and the sound a troubled hive made, a higher, more agitated buzz, a sound of uncertainty, of a system under stress. He knew more about bees than anyone in the valley, and possibly more than anyone in the province. And what he knew, more than anything else, was that the bees did not need him. They built their comb without his instruction. They fed their young without his guidance. They found the flowers without his maps. They navigated by the sun and the earth's own magnetism, finding their way across distances that would confuse a person without landmarks or signs, returning to their hive with a precision that no human technology could match. They communicated through dance, a waggling, turning, precisely calibrated dance that told the other bees exactly where the flowers were, how far, in which direction, and how plentiful. And this dance was a language older than any human language, a language that had been refined over millions of years of evolution, and it worked perfectly, and no human had ever taught it to them. Old Sung's job, as he understood it, was not to manage the bees. It was to provide the conditions in which they could manage themselves. He built the boxes. He checked for disease. He made sure the hives were sheltered from wind and had access to water. He harvested the honey that the bees produced in excess of what they needed for themselves. But the actual work, the impossible, intricate, astonishing work of turning sunlight into flowers, into nectar, into honey, that was the bees' work, and it proceeded according to rules that old Sung could observe but never direct. One spring, a young farmer's son came to old Sung asking to learn beekeeping. He was an energetic young man with the particular confidence of someone who has recently discovered that he is good at something and believes that this goodness can be applied to everything. He had been good at planting. He had been good at raising chickens. He had been good at mending fences and building walls. He was a practical, capable young man, and he approached beekeeping the way he approached everything, as a problem to be solved, a system to be mastered, a challenge that would yield to effort and intelligence and careful planning. He lasted 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, he tried to reorganize a hive. He moved frames from one position to another because he thought the bees had arranged them inefficiently. The bees moved them back. He tried to redirect the flight path of the foragers by planting flowers closer to the hive, thinking it would save them energy. The bees ignored his flowers and continued flying to the wildflower meadow, half a mile away, because the meadow flowers had more nectar, and the bees knew this, and they did not care about efficiency in the way the young man understood efficiency. He tried to control the timing of the honey harvest, taking honey early because he thought the hive had a surplus. The bees, deprived of stores they needed for a spell of bad weather, they sensed coming, but he did not, grew agitated and defensive, and he was stung 17 times in one afternoon. He came to Old Sung that evening, his face swollen, his hands puffy, his pride in worse shape than his skin. "I do not understand them," he said. "I did everything right. I planned. I prepared. I tried to help them, and they rejected every single thing I did." Old Sung was sitting outside his house, watching the last bees of the day returning to the hives. They came in ones and twos, heavy with pollen, their flight paths low and direct, their landings precise. Each one disappeared into the narrow entrance of its hive and did not come out again. The hives hummed with the sound of 10,000 small lives settling in for the night. "You did everything right according to your plan," Old Sung said. "But the bees have their own plan, and their plan is older than yours, and more tested, and more refined. Their plan has been working for longer than human beings have existed. It does not need your improvements. But surely there are ways to make them more productive," the young man said. "Surely there are better arrangements, better techniques, better according to whom?" Old Sung asked. "According to you? You have been keeping bees for 3 weeks. The bees have been keeping themselves for 100 million years. When you reorganized the hive, you were a 3-week-old intelligence, overruling 100-million-year-old intelligence. How do you think that would end?" The young man sat down heavily on the bench beside Old Sung. His swollen face had the particular look of someone who was reconsidering a fundamental assumption about how the world works. "Then what is the beekeeper's job?" he asked. "If the bees do not need us, why are we here?" "The beekeeper's job," Old Sung said, "is to pay attention, not to direct, not to control, not to improve, just to pay attention, to notice when a hive is sick and needs help, to notice when a colony is growing too large and needs to be split, to notice when the season is changing and the bee's behavior is changing with it. The beekeeper watches and provides and protects. And then, this is the hardest part, the beekeeper steps back and lets the bees do what the bees know how to do." He looked at the hives. The humming had grown softer as the evening deepened, the bees settling into their nighttime configuration, clustering together for warmth, fanning their wings to regulate the temperature inside the hive, doing all the things they had been doing since long before any human had thought to put them in a box. "It is very hard for a capable person to step back," Old Sung said. "A capable person wants to do things. A capable person wants to apply their intelligence and their energy and their will. And in many areas of life, this is exactly what is needed. But with bees, and perhaps with many other things, the most useful thing a capable person can do is to become still, to watch, to learn what the system is doing before deciding what the system should do. And often, after watching for long enough, the capable person discovers that the system does not need to be told what to do at all. It already knows. It has always known. And the most helpful thing the capable person can do is to stop interfering and start trusting. The young man sat there for a while, listening to the hives, watching the last light fade from the sky. The swelling on his face was beginning to go down, but the swelling on his assumptions would take longer to subside. "My father's neighbor is the farmer with the horse," the young man said at last. "The one who says, perhaps so, perhaps not." "I know him," Old Sung said. "He told me once that the bravest thing a farmer does is plant a seed without knowing if it will grow. Do you think the same is true for beekeeping?" Old Sung considered this. "The bravest thing a beekeeper does," he said, "is open the hive and look inside without already knowing what he wants to find. Most of us open the hive with a picture in our mind. This is what a healthy hive should look like. This is how the frames should be arranged. This is how much honey should be stored. And when the hive does not match the picture, we call it a problem. We call it disease, or disorder, or inefficiency. But often, the hive is doing exactly what it needs to do. It is just not doing what we expected. The bravest thing is to see what is actually there, instead of what we wanted to be there, and to trust that what is actually there has a reason, even if we cannot see the reason yet." The young man went home. He did not come back to learn beekeeping, but Old Sung noticed, in the weeks that followed, that the young man's garden, which had always been aggressively neat, the rows ruler straight, every weed pulled before it could unfurl its first leaf, began to change. Not into wildness, not into neglect, but into something a little softer, a little more forgiving, a little more willing to let the plants find their own way. A few volunteer flowers appeared at the edges, and they were not pulled. A vine wound its way up a fence post, unplanned and unpermitted, and it was allowed to stay. And the garden, freed from the young man's relentless perfecting, began to look less like a diagram and more like a garden, a living, breathing, slightly uncontrollable place where things grew the way they wanted to grow, and the growing was its own logic, and the logic was enough. On the river that ran through the valley, the broad, slow river that caught the light and carried it downstream, there was a ferry crossing. It was not much to look at. A flat wooden boat, a rope strung between two posts on opposite banks, and a ferryman who pulled the boat back and forth, from morning to evening, carrying people and livestock and carts and baskets of grain from one side of the river to the other. The ferryman's name was Kong, and he had been pulling the ferry since he was a young man, taking over the work from his father, who had taken it over from his father before that. The ferry was a family trade, passed down through generations like a set of tools or a recipe, and Kang performed it with the quiet, automatic competence of someone doing something he has done so many times that his body does it while his mind is elsewhere. But Kang's mind was rarely elsewhere. Kang's mind was almost always right here, on the river, in the boat, attending to the small, constant details that the work required, the tension in the rope, the drift of the current, the weight of the passengers, and the way it shifted the boat's balance. He was a man who lived in the present moment, not because he had achieved some philosophical insight, but because the river demanded it. The river was always changing. Its depth changed with the season. Its current changed with the rain. Its mood, and the river did have moods, Kong was certain of this, changed with the wind and the temperature and the time of day, and 100 other factors that no one could predict or control. And Kong, sitting in the middle of all this change, pulling his rope, could not afford to be anywhere but here, because here was the only place where the information he needed was available. A man who needs to know the river's current depth and current speed and current mood cannot consult last week's data. He must feel the water under the boat right now, in this moment, and respond to what he feels, not to what he remembers. One afternoon, a traveling scholar came to the crossing. He was carrying a large bundle of scrolls on his back, and his robes were dusty from the road, and he had the look of a man who had been walking for a long time and thinking for even longer. He stepped onto the ferry and settled his bundle carefully on the boards and sat down with the particular heaviness of someone who was carrying not just scrolls, but the weight of everything he has read in them. "Which side are you going to?" Kang asked. "The other side," the scholar said, as travelers always did. Kang began to pull. The rope moved through his hands, rough and familiar, and the boat slid out from the bank and into the current, and the water pushed against the hull with the patient, persistent force that water always applies. Not dramatic, not violent, just constant, constant, constant. The force of something that never stops and therefore never needs to be strong. The scholar watched the water pass beneath the boat. "How do you know the river will not overturn us?" he asked. "I do not know that," Kang said. The scholar looked alarmed. "You do not? I know the river today. I know the current today. I know the wind today, and the weight on the boat today, and the way the rope feels in my hands today. I do not know what the river will do tomorrow, or even in the next hour. I know what it is doing now." "And that is enough." Kang pulled steadily. The boat moved through the water at the pace the water allowed. Not faster, not slower, but at the exact speed that the current and the rope and the ferryman's arms and the weight of the passengers agreed upon. A speed that was negotiated freshly every moment, because the river was not the same river from moment to moment, and the boat was not the same boat, and the ferryman was not the same ferryman. "It has been enough for 30 years, Kang said. The scholar sat with this. The water slid past the boat in slow dark sheets, carrying small pieces of light on its surface, reflections of clouds that had already moved on, images of a sky that had already changed. "I study wisdom," the scholar said. "I have read the teachings of 100 masters. I can recite the sutras, the ancient texts, from memory. I understand impermanence as a concept. I can define it, explain it, argue for it, defend it against skeptics. I have written 3 treatises on the nature of change." He paused. The water made a soft lapping sound against the side of the boat, the sound of a river that did not care about treatises. "And yet, I'm afraid of the river," the scholar said quietly. "I'm afraid of this crossing. I'm afraid because I cannot see the bottom, and I do not know the current, and I am sitting in a wooden box on top of something I do not understand. And all my reading, and all my studying, and all my understanding of impermanence has not made me less afraid. If anything, it has made me more afraid, because I understand better than most people exactly how many things can go wrong." Kang pulled the rope. The boat was in the middle of the river now, the deepest part, where the current was strongest, and the banks were equally distant on both sides, and there was nothing to hold on to except the rope and the ferryman and the thin wooden hull that separated the passengers from the water. "You have studied the river in your books," Kang said. "Have you studied it with your hands. What do you mean? Put your hand in the water. The scholar looked at the river. It was dark and opaque, and it moved with a force that he could feel through the hull of the boat, a force that was not threatening, but was undeniably present, like the heartbeat of something very large and very old. He leaned over the side of the boat and put his hand in the water. It was cool, not cold, not warm, cool. The current pressed against his fingers, steady and even, and he could feel the river's strength in that pressure, not as something violent or dangerous, but as something alive, something that was going somewhere, doing something, being something, with or without his participation. What do you feel? Kang asked. I feel the current, the scholar said. I feel the temperature. I feel the river. And is the river what you expected from your books? The scholar was quiet for a long time. His hand stayed in the water. The current moved around his fingers, splitting and rejoining on the other side, the way water always does when it meets something in its path. Not fighting, not avoiding, simply flowing around, finding the easiest way, continuing on, unperturbed. It is simpler than I expected, the scholar said. In my books, the river is a symbol. It represents impermanence, the flow of time, the nature of change. It carries the weight of 1,000 metaphors. But here, with my hand in it, it is just water. It is just cool and moving and real. Yes, Kang said, that is the river. The metaphors are yours. The water is the waters. He pulled the boat to the far bank. The hull scraped gently against the mud, and the scholar gathered his scrolls and stepped onto the shore, and his sandals sank slightly into the soft earth, and he felt the ground under his feet, the way a person feels ground after a long time on water, as something steady, something that does not move, something that holds you up without being asked. Thank you, the scholar said. You are welcome, Kang said. You will cross again? I will cross again. Good. The river will be different then. I will be different. The boat will be different. Everything will be different. And the crossing will still work. The scholar walked up the bank and onto the road that led to wherever he was going next. And Kang pulled the ferry back across the river, the rope rough and familiar in his hands, the water moving beneath him in its slow, constant, ever-changing way, and the afternoon sun lay on the surface of the river like a golden cloth laid out by someone with no particular plan, for no particular purpose, simply because the light was there and the water was there, and the meeting of the two was something too beautiful to organize and too ordinary to remark upon. In the village, the children ran between the houses in loose, noisy packs, the way children do in villages everywhere, half feral, half tended, belonging to every household and to none, fed by whichever grandmother was nearest, and scolded by whichever grandfather happened to be sitting outside when they knocked over a basket or startled a chicken. Among these children, there was one, a girl of about 7, whose name was Leon, who had the particular quality of asking questions that adults did not know how to answer. Not rude questions, not disrespectful ones, simply questions that cut through the comfortable fog of assumption and habit, and arrived at something that everyone felt but no one said, the way a bird flies through a wall of mist and comes out the other side into clear air. Leon was the kind of child who stopped in the middle of a game to stare at the sky and ask why it was blue, and then, before anyone could answer, asked whether the sky knew it was blue, and then, before anyone could recover from that, asked whether knowing changed the color. Adults found her charming and slightly unnerving, the way adults always find children who have not yet learned to stop asking the questions that adults have agreed to stop asking. One afternoon, Leanne was walking past the farmer's house on her way home from the river, where she had been catching tadpoles in a clay jar. The jar was heavy with water and small squirming things, and she was concentrating on not spilling it, walking with the careful, flat-footed gait of someone carrying something precious and fragile. The farmer was in his garden, pulling weeds. He was on his knees in the dirt, his hands dark with soil, working with the slow, methodical patience of a man who has been doing the same thing for so many years that the doing has become a kind of meditation. His body moved and his mind was still, and the weeds came up between his fingers like small confessions, easily released. Leanne stopped at the fence. She set the jar of tadpoles on the ground beside her and leaned on the top rail, her chin resting on her arms, watching the farmer work. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Pulling weeds," the farmer said, without looking up. "Why?" "Because they grow where I do not want them to grow. They take water and sun from the plants I am trying to grow." "But the weeds want to grow too," Leanne said. The farmer looked up. He had heard this kind of observation before, from monks, from scholars, from people who thought they were being clever, but from a 7-year-old, it was not clever. It was simply true. The weeds did want to grow. They wanted it with the same blind, insistent force that drove every growing thing, the same force that pushed his rice out of the mud and his persimmons off the branch and the grass up through the cracks in the village road. "You are right," the farmer said. "The weeds want to grow, and I want my plants to grow, and the garden is not large enough for both, so I make a choice. I choose the plants, not because the weeds are bad, but because I have planted the plants, and I owe them the room they need." Leanne considered this. She scratched her nose with a muddy finger. "Do the plants know you chose them?" she asked. "No," the farmer said. "They do not know. They just grow." Leanne was quiet for a while, watching the farmer's hands move through the soil. Then she said, in the casual, unweighted tone that children use when they are about to say something enormous, "Why do grown-ups always worry about tomorrow?" The farmer sat back on his heels. He wiped his hands on his trousers and looked at the child. She was not looking at him. She was looking at her jar of tadpoles, watching them swim in circles in the cloudy water, small dark shapes moving through a small contained world. "What makes you think grown-ups worry about tomorrow?" the farmer asked. "Because they talk about it all the time," Leanne said. "My mother says, 'What if the rain does not come?' My father says, 'What if the price of grain goes down?' My grandmother says, 'What if the winter is cold?' They always say what if. They never say what is. They are always somewhere else. They are always in a day that has not happened yet." She looked up at the farmer with the direct, unapologetic gaze of a child who has not yet learned that some truths are not supposed to be spoken aloud. "Do you worry about tomorrow?" she asked. The farmer looked at his garden. The plants he had tended were growing well. The leaves were green and broad. The stems were strong. The soil was dark with moisture. They did not know about tomorrow. They did not know about the weather or the market price or the chance of frost. They knew about right now. They knew about the sun that was currently on their leaves and the water that was currently in their roots, and they grew toward those things with a simplicity that no amount of human intelligence could improve upon. "I used to," the farmer said. "I used to worry about tomorrow the way your mother and father do. I used to lie awake at night and build the next day in my mind, brick by brick, trying to make it safe before it arrived. I was very good at it. I could imagine 100 tomorrows, each one worse than the last, and I could feel the fear of each one in my body, as though it were already happening." "And then you stopped?" "Not exactly. I did not stop worrying the way you stop walking, by deciding to stand still. I stopped the way the sun stops rising." "I did not. The sun does not stop rising. It rises every morning regardless of what happened yesterday. And I did not stop worrying. I stopped believing that the worrying was doing something. I stopped believing that my fear of tomorrow was protecting me from tomorrow. I noticed, slowly, over many years, that the things I worried about almost never happened the way I imagined them, and the things that did happen were almost never the things I had worried about. My worry and the world were having two completely different conversations, and neither one was listening to the other." Leon picked up her jar of tadpoles and peered into it. The tadpoles swam in circles, bumping against the sides of the jar, small dark commas moving through their small wet world. "Tadpoles do not worry about becoming frogs," she said. The farmer blinked. He had not expected this, and then he realized that he should have, because children are always saying the thing you did not expect, the thing that arrives sideways, slipping past all your careful constructions and landing precisely where it needs to land. "No," he said, "they do not. They just swim," Leon said. "They just eat and swim and eat and swim. And one day they have legs, and then they have lungs, and then they are frogs. And they did not plan any of it. They did not lie awake at night, wondering whether their legs would come, or whether they would be good frogs, or whether other frogs would like them. They just swam, and the legs came." The farmer looked at the child. She was 7 years old, and she had just said something that monks spend decades trying to understand and rarely articulate as clearly. "You are right," the farmer said. "I know," Leon said, with the serene confidence of someone who has not yet learned to doubt her own observations. "But I do not understand why grown-ups do not know this. It is not a hard thing to see. The tadpoles know it. The plants know it. Even the weeds know it. Why do grown-ups forget?" The farmer thought about this for a long time. The afternoon light was warm on his face, and the garden smelled of turned earth and growing things. And somewhere in the village, a dog barked once, and then was quiet. "I think," the farmer said slowly, "that grown-ups forget because they learn to remember. When you are small, you live in today because you do not know how to live anywhere else. You have not learned the trick of pulling tomorrow into today, of imagining what has not happened and feeling the feelings of it before it arrives. You do not know how to do that yet, and so you are free of it, the way a bird is free of walking because it has never learned to walk." He paused. A butterfly moved through the garden, following a path that no human eye could predict, a path that was perfectly logical to the butterfly and perfectly mysterious to everyone else. And then, as you grow, you learn to imagine, you learn to plan, you learn to worry, you learn to pull the future into the present and examine it and prepare for it and fear it. And this is useful. It is how we plant crops and build houses and prepare for winter. But it comes with a cost. The cost is that you lose the ability to be only here, only now, only in this moment with the sun and the soil and the sound of the weeds being pulled. You trade the simplicity of the tadpole for the complexity of the person, and the complexity is powerful, but it is also heavy, and most of us carry it for so long that we forget we are carrying it. Leanne set the jar down again. She looked at the farmer with a seriousness that sat oddly on her small, muddy face. "I do not want to learn to worry," she said. "You may not have a choice," the farmer said gently. "It may come to you the way legs come to a tadpole, not because you choose it, but because you grow. But if it comes, you can also learn the other thing, the thing after the worrying." "What is the thing after the worrying?" "It is the remembering," the farmer said. "Not the remembering of facts or plans, the remembering of this moment, this garden, this sun, this dirt under your fingernails. The remembering that before you learned to worry, you knew how to be here, and that knowing did not go away. It just got buried under all the tomorrows you learned to imagine, and it is still there, underneath, like a seed under the soil, like a tadpole in the jar, like the water under the earth that feeds the river that you cannot see." Leanne looked at her jar. The tadpoles were still swimming. The sun was still shining. The weeds were still growing. The farmer was still kneeling in his garden, his hands dark with the soil of the only day that was actually happening. "I am going to go put these tadpoles back in the river," Leanne said. "They do not like the jar. It is too small. They want to be where the water goes wherever it wants." "That sounds right," the farmer said. She picked up the jar and walked away, her feet leaving small muddy prints on the path. And the farmer went back to his weeding, and the afternoon continued in the way that afternoons do when no one is trying to make them into anything other than what they already are. In the village temple, a simple wooden structure on the hill above the main road, with a curved roof that the birds liked to sit on, and walls that smelled of old incense and warm wood, there lived an old monk. He had lived there for longer than most people could remember, tending the small garden beside the temple, sweeping the stone path, and sitting in the main hall in the early mornings before anyone else was awake, in the kind of stillness that is not the absence of activity, but the deepest form of it. His name was Master Yun, and he was the kind of monk who made other monks nervous because he did not talk very much. And when he did talk, he said things that sounded simple, but turned out, upon reflection, to be the kind of simple that takes a lifetime to understand. He was not impressive to look at. A small, thin man with a face like a walnut and hands that were always a little dirty from the garden. He wore the same faded robe every day, and his sandals were so worn that the sole on the left one had developed a hole that he did not bother to repair, because, as he had said when someone pointed it out, "The soul lets in the earth. Why would I close the door?" The farmer and Master Yun had known each other for many years. not as teacher and student, not as monk and layman, but as two men who lived in the same valley and had arrived by different paths at a similar place. They did not see each other often. The farmer's life was in the fields and the stable, and the monk's life was in the temple and the garden. But when they did meet, at the village well, on the road to the market, or on the rare occasions when one visited the other, their conversations had the particular ease of people who do not need to explain themselves because they have already understood. One evening, late in the autumn, when the harvest was mostly gathered and the fields had the bare, resting look of land that has given everything it has and is now waiting to give again, Master Yun walked down the hill from the temple and appeared at the farmer's gate. The farmer was in the stable. He was not doing anything in particular. He was standing with his horse, running his hand along the animal's neck, the way he did every evening, a simple, wordless communion that was as much a part of his day as eating or sleeping. The horse stood still under his hand, its eyes half closed, its breath slow and warm in the cool evening air. "Good evening," Master Yun said from the gate. The farmer looked up. "Good evening, master. Come in." The monk came into the stable. He moved the way he always moved, slowly, deliberately, as though each step were a decision rather than a habit. He looked at the horse. The horse looked at him. There was a moment of mutual assessment, the kind that happens between animals and monks, both of whom are better than most humans at recognizing what is true about a person. "This is the horse," Master Yun said. It was not a question. "This is the horse," the farmer agreed. The monk reached out and touched the horse's nose. The horse sniffed his hand, found nothing of interest, and went back to its straw. "I heard about your visitor," the monk said. "The stranger who came and asked you why you are never moved by fortune or misfortune." "He came and asked," the farmer said. "I answered as well as I could. And the young merchant, the one who could not sleep, he came too. I told him what I know, which is not much. And Grandmother Chen, and the woodcutter, and the child." The farmer smiled. "News travels fast in a small valley." "It does," the monk said. "And the news of your horse has traveled faster than most. People come to you now as though you were a teacher, as though you have answers." "I do not have answers," the farmer said. "I have a horse." Master Yun laughed. It was a thin, dry sound, like the sound of old leaves brushing together. "That is the best answer you have given yet." They stood in silence for a while, the two of them and the horse, in the warm, straw-smelling dark of the stable. The evening was coming on, turning the light from gold to amber to something deeper, something that did not have a name in any language, but that everyone recognized. The color of the world settling down, putting its things away, preparing for rest. "May I tell you something?" the monk said. "Of course. People have been coming to me at the temple as well. They come because they have heard the story of your horse, and they want to understand it, and they think that a monk will be able to explain it better than a farmer. They want doctrine. They want a framework. They want me to tell them which teaching this falls under, which sutra this echoes, which practice will help them achieve the same equanimity you have." "And what do you tell them?" "I tell them to go talk to you," the monk said, "because you have something I do not have." The farmer looked at the monk with surprise. "What could I have that you do not?" "The horse," Master Yun said simply. The farmer waited. The monk gathered his words the way he gathered herbs from his garden, carefully, one at a time, placing each one precisely where it belonged. "I have spent my life studying the teachings," the monk said. "I have read the sutras, the ancient texts that contain the wisdom of those who came before. I have sat in meditation since I was a young man. I understand impermanence, the truth that all things change and nothing lasts, not as a concept, but as something I have felt in my bones, the way you feel the weather. I understand non-attachment, the practice of holding things lightly, without grasping, as deeply as I understand anything. I can speak about these things with precision and clarity, and I believe that what I say is true." He paused. The horse shifted its weight from one foot to the other, a small, unconscious adjustment that had no meaning and no importance, the way most of what happens in the world has no meaning and no importance, and is beautiful precisely because of that. "But you do not speak about these things at all," the monk continued. "You do not use the words. You do not reference the teachings. You do not even seem to know that what you are doing has a name. You simply live. You lose a horse, and you do not collapse. You gain a horse, and you do not celebrate. Your son is hurt, and you feel the pain, and you do not make the pain into a story about the unfairness of the world. Your son is saved, and you feel the relief, and you do not make the relief into a story about the generosity of fate. You are not practicing non-attachment. You are simply not attached. There's a difference, and the difference is everything." The farmer was quiet for a long time. He continued stroking the horse's neck, his hand moving in the same slow rhythm, back and forth, and the horse's breathing was slow and even beneath his palm. "I do not know about your teachings," the farmer said at last. "I'm not a learned man. I know about planting and harvesting. I know about horses. I know about the way the weather changes, and the way the soil changes, and the way the river changes its course in the night, and you wake up, and the water is somewhere else, and you have to find it again." He paused. "But I have learned one thing from all of this changing," he said, "and it is a very small thing, and it is probably the same thing your teachings say in more elaborate language. I have learned that the only thing I can do with today is today. The horse is here, or it is not. The rain comes, or it does not. The sun walks, or he does not. And whatever is happening today, whatever is actually, truly, undeniably happening right now, in this stable, in this light, with this straw, and this horse, and this breath, that is the only thing I need to attend to. Not because tomorrow does not matter, but because tomorrow is not here yet. And when tomorrow comes, it will be today, and I will attend to it then." Master Yun nodded. Then he said something that the farmer would remember for the rest of his life, not because it was profound, but because it was so simple that it went straight through all his defenses and settled into a place he did not know he had. "You do not need to know whether this horse is a blessing or a burden," the monk said. "You only need to know that today you feed it. Today you stand in this stable with your hand on its neck. Today you listen to the sound it makes when it eats. That is your whole practice. That is your whole teaching. That is everything." The farmer looked at the monk. The monk looked at the horse. The horse looked at neither of them. It ate its straw with the patient, single-minded focus of an animal that has never once in its entire life wondered what tomorrow would bring. That is what I tell them, the monk said. When they come to the temple and ask me to explain your story, I tell them, go home, feed whatever is in your stable tonight. Do not ask whether it is a blessing or a burden. Just feed it. The knowing will come, or it will not, and either way, the horse needs to eat. The farmer put his other hand on the horse's neck, so that both hands rested on the warm, rough coat, and the horse's heartbeat was a slow, steady rhythm beneath his palms, and the stable was warm, and the evening was deep, and the world outside was doing whatever the world does when no one is watching it, changing, shifting, moving its rivers and its clouds and its fortune and its misfortune from one place to another in patterns that no farmer and no monk and no scholar and no child could ever fully predict or fully understand. And the horse ate its straw, and the monk stood in the stable with the farmer, and none of them asked what would happen next. The evening had settled fully now, the kind of evening that does not arrive all at once, but seeps in at the edges, the way water seeps into dry ground, slowly, patiently, without announcement, until you look up and realize that the light has changed, and the sky has changed, and the air has changed, and you are no longer in the day, but in the space between the day and the night, the space that belongs to neither and holds both. The farmer stood alone in the stable. Master Yun had gone back up the hill to the temple, his footsteps growing softer on the stone path until they disappeared entirely, absorbed by the evening and the silence and the distance. The village was quiet. The children had been called inside. The dogs had found their places beneath the porches. The smoke from the kitchen fires rose straight up into the windless sky, thin gray lines drawn on a darkening canvas. The horse stood in its stall. It had finished eating and was now simply standing, the way horses stand when there is nothing more to do, and they are content with that, weight resting evenly on all four legs, head low, eyes half closed, tail occasionally moving in a slow, aimless arc, brushing nothing, reaching for nothing, just moving, because that is what tails do. The farmer stood beside the horse and said nothing. He did not think about the morning the horse had disappeared, the open gate, the empty stable, the neighbors arriving with their sympathy and their certainty that the world had turned against him. He did not think about the afternoon the horse had returned, walking calmly through the gate with its wild companion, as though it had simply gone for a long walk and found a friend. He did not think about his son's fall, the sound of the bone, the weeks of pain and healing. He did not think about the war, the young men leaving, his son staying behind, the guilt and relief and confusion that had swirled through the village like a storm that could not decide whether it was coming or going. He did not think about any of it, not because he had decided not to think about it, but because this moment, this particular, unrepeatable moment, with the stable warm around him, and the horse breathing slow beside him, and the sky turning from amber to blue, to the color of deep water outside the stable door. This moment did not require any of those thoughts. This moment required only his presence, his hands on the horse's neck, his feet on the straw-covered floor, his breath slow and even, matching the horse's breath without trying to, The way two clocks in the same room will eventually synchronize their ticking, not because they are aware of each other, but because proximity has a rhythm of its own. The horse shifted its weight. A small movement, barely visible, one hip dropping slightly, one hoof adjusting its position on the floor. The farmer felt the movement through his hands, a quiet rearrangement of the animal's body, a response to something the farmer could not see or know, a slight ache in a joint, perhaps, or a change in the angle of balance, or simply the horse's body doing what bodies do when they are standing still, which is to make small, continuous adjustments that no one notices and that keep the whole structure upright. The farmer did not try to understand the movement. He did not ask what it meant. He simply felt it, the way you feel the wind without asking where it came from, or feel the warmth of the sun without asking why it is warm. He felt it, and he let it pass through his hands and into his awareness and out again, like a word spoken once in a quiet room, heard and understood, and then released. Outside, the first star appeared, not the brightest star and not the most important, just the first one to become visible as the sky darkened. A small, steady point of light in the vast blue expanse, like a single candle lit in a cathedral, not illuminating anything, not trying to light the way, simply existing, simply burning, because that is what stars do. The farmer looked at the star through the open door of the stable. He did not make a wish. He did not think about what the star meant. He looked at it the way the horse looked at the straw in its manger, with simple, undivided attention, the attention of a being that is not waiting for the next moment, because this one is sufficient. The horse breathed. The star burned. The evening deepened, and somewhere in the village, in a house with a lantern glowing in the window, a young merchant was falling asleep without knowing what tomorrow would bring. And somewhere on the hill, in a temple that smelled of incense and old wood, a monk was sitting in the dark, not meditating, not praying, just sitting, the way stones sit, the way mountains sit, the way the earth itself sits beneath everything that moves and changes and worries and plans and fears and hopes and strives. Just sitting, holding it all, asking nothing in return. And somewhere on a road that led away from the valley and into the wide, unpredictable world, a stranger was walking under the same sky, carrying the farmer's story in his memory, not as a lesson or a doctrine, but as a small, smooth stone that he had picked up from a conversation and would carry for a while, and eventually set down somewhere when the time was right, when the carrying was done, when the stone wanted to stop traveling and rest. The farmer closed the stable door. The wood was old and smooth and warm under his hands, worn by years of opening and closing, and the hinges moved easily, the way well-used things always do, not stiffly, not reluctantly, but with the gentle cooperation of materials that have been in relationship with each other for a long time and have learned each other's ways. He stood outside the stable in the last of the light. The valley was spread below him, dark and quiet, the shapes of the houses softened by distance, the river a faint silver line at the bottom, reflecting whatever was left of the sky. The mountains on either side were black against the deep blue, the outlines as familiar to him as the outlines of his own hands. He did not think about tomorrow, not because he had achieved some special state of enlightenment, not because he had mastered some ancient technique for stilling the mind. He did not think about tomorrow because tonight was enough. Tonight, the horse was home. Tonight, the stable was warm. Tonight, the sky was full of stars he did not need to count, and the valley was full of people he did not need to save, and the earth was full of seeds he did not need to watch over, and the future was full of chapters he did not need to read before they were written. He went inside. He lit the lamp. He ate his simple evening meal. He lay down on his bed, and as the darkness grew deeper, and the stars grew brighter, and the village grew quieter, he felt the particular kind of peace that comes not from knowing that everything will be all right, but from not needing to know. The peace that comes from setting down the need to see around corners. The peace that lives in the space between the question and the answer, the way the moon lives on the surface of still water. Not because the moon descends into the pond, but because the water has simply stopped trying to be anything other than itself, and in that stillness, the light appears. Tonight, the horse is home. That is the whole story. Not the beginning of a story, not the middle of a story. The whole story. The horse is home, and the stable is warm, and the farmer is resting, and the moon is on the water, and you, wherever you are, in whatever room, in whatever city, on whatever night, you are here too. You are in your own stable. You are standing beside your own horse, which might be a worry or a plan or a question you cannot answer or a future you cannot see. And you do not need to answer it. You do not need to see it. You do not need to know whether it is a blessing or a burden, whether it will bring fortune or misfortune, whether the story it is part of will end well or badly. You only need to know that tonight you are here. Tonight, the horse is home. And perhaps that is all any of us ever need to know. Perhaps the whole of wisdom, the whole long library of sutras and koans and parables and teachings comes down to this one small, warm, ordinary thing. You are here, and it is enough. The breath you are breathing right now is the only breath that matters. The pillow under your head is the only ground you need. The darkness around you is not the darkness of the unknown. It is the darkness of rest, the darkness of a world that has put its questions away for the night and is simply being the way the horse simply stands and the water simply flows and the stars simply burn, asking nothing, solving nothing, proving nothing, simply being, simply here, simply now. You do not need to finish this thought. You do not need to solve anything tonight. The story is still unfolding. The ink is still wet. The chapter you are worried about has not been written yet, and it will not be written tonight, and you do not need to read it before it arrives. You only need to let the night hold you. Let the silence settle. Let the breath slow. Let the water become still. And if the light appears on its surface, the pale, round reflection of something you cannot name and do not need to name, let it be there. It came because you stopped trying. It came because you stopped reaching. It came because you, like the water, simply became still enough to hold it. The horse is home. The stable door is closed. The valley is dark and quiet. The moon is on the water. Perhaps your own horse came home tonight. Perhaps the thing you were waiting for, the thing you were worried about, the question you could not answer. Perhaps it settled just a little while you were listening. Not solved, not answered, just settled. The way snow settles on a field, covering the furrows and the stones and the stubble with the same soft white, so that everything looks the same, and the differences that seemed so important in the daylight disappear beneath the quiet weight of what has arrived without being asked for. You do not need to name what has settled. You do not need to understand it. You do not need to hold it or examine it or ask it whether it is fortune or misfortune, whether it brings good news or bad. You only need to let it rest, the way the farmer lets the horse rest, the way the river lets the moonlight rest on its surface, the way the earth lets the seeds rest in the darkness, not knowing which will grow and which will not, trusting that the growing will happen in its own time, in its own way, for its own reasons. The night is very quiet now. The stories have come and gone, like travelers passing through a valley, each one carrying a small piece of the same truth, each one setting it down in a different place. And now the valley is empty again, and the truth is everywhere, and you do not need to find it, because it has already found you. It found you the way the rain finds the earth, by falling, by simply, gently, persistently falling, until the ground is soft, and the roots are fed, and the seeds begin, in the darkness, to stir. Let your eyes close, if they are not already closed. Let your breath slow. Let the weight of the day, and the weight of tomorrow, and the weight of all the tomorrows you have been carrying in your pockets like smooth river stones. Let them rest on the ground beside you. They will still be there in the morning if you want to pick them up again. But tonight, your pockets are empty, and the emptiness is not a loss. It is a lightness. It is the feeling of hands that are holding nothing. It is the feeling of a mind that has set down its tools. It is the feeling of a farmer standing in a stable at the end of the day, watching a horse eat straw, needing nothing, planning nothing, knowing nothing except that this moment, this small, warm, ordinary moment, is enough. Rest now.